Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. And, on this 30th anniversary of FMLA, it's really important to, as the previous speakers have mentioned, look at the lessons learned from the pandemic. I just think of the early days of the pandemic when I was going through the drive-through at the various places where I have to go to keep my kids fed because, my daughter at that time would only eat nuggets. Only chicken nuggets. You had that stage, right? And I remember thinking the folks here don't have an option. And some of them may be sick. Right. Because their choice was go to work and get a paycheck to take care of their families or stay home unpaid. And so and some people were choosing not to get tested, even after testing became widely available, because they were afraid that they would have to take time off and that time off would be unpaid and then they couldn't pay their bills and take care of their families. While 30 years ago, the FMLA's passage marked a huge step forward for our country, this truth is the law didn't go far enough and we need paid leave. In the meantime, as we're working towards paid leave, we also need to include more people under FMLA. Bus drivers that are responsible for our kids' lives as they get them to school and back are not given a chance to look after their own children, should they that be necessary. Some nurses who bandage our kids' knees when they fall at recess. The cafeteria workers who keep our kids fed and somehow manage to remember our kids' individual allergies. These folks may not be given the leave they need to care for their own newborn if they decide to start a family of their own one day too. Excluded from accessing benefits under FMLA, the ESPs are too often forced to make impossible choices between keeping their jobs and looking after a loved one. And this is completely unacceptable. So that's why I'm proud to be reintroducing my ESP and School Supports Staff Family Leave Act to right this wrong, to make sure that more of our schools' employees can finally access the basic hard-earned benefits through FMLA that they've long earned and certainly deserve. And it would modernize our nation's leave system, giving workers that the time that they need to take care of themselves, which in turn will strengthen our communities and our country. So thank you all for being here this afternoon. Thank you for FMLA. Certainly, my husband took advantage of it when I was wounded in Iraq, and he had to take time off to sit by my bedside for all those weeks. He was promptly fired as soon as the 12 weeks ran out, and he worked for an ROTC educational program. So it was a contractor that was, and his job was as a professor of military science, teaching and training the next generation of cadets. And as soon as his FMLA ran out, which was unpaid, they're like, thank you, you don't need to come back. Wow. This is how cutthroat it is out there. We need paid leave. We need paid leave so that people can take the time and take care of their loved ones. And we also need to make sure we take care of ESPs and all of those wonderful people who take care of our children when they're in schools. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Sean? Congress.
Duckworth.
Thank you. I join my colleagues in condemning this marketing campaign. I think I'm the only person on this stage who actually carried an assault weapon for 23 years in my military service and qualified at the expert level in firing those weapons. Let me tell you, these weapons are intended to kill enemy combatants. They are intended to knock down the enemy, rip apart bodies so that they cannot get back up and shoot back at you on the field of combat. These rifles are intended to kill enemy combatants who are wearing body armor. Yet they're remarkably similar to the kind that this company is trying to seduce our kids into coveting. The gunmaker itself admitted it. They wrote just about the sickest phrase I can imagine in 2021 in a press release, claiming, bragging really, that their JR-15, and I quote, operates just like mom and dad's gun. Some of the children in these ads don't yet appear old enough to know their times table. Some of these kids that they're marketing to might not yet be allowed to cut up their own dinner because mommy and daddy still considers the knife to be too sharp. We certainly don't see companies advertising tactical knives to children of this age, and we would probably be just as upset by it. And yet One Tactical has looked at these elementary schoolers, has looked at our babies, and decided that making a few more dollars is worth the added risk to these children's lives. They've made the calculated, craven choice to value their own profits ahead of our daughters' and sons' odds of making it to next year's science fair. Last May, I went to talk to my daughter's Memorial Day class event. Her teacher had asked me to come to explain the meaning of Memorial Day, to talk about the sacrifices that our troops have made to safeguard our freedoms and rights as a nation, including the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And as I was talking in my older daughter's, my 8-year-old's classroom, I happened to look out the window into the hallway, only to see my younger daughter, my 4-year-old, in the middle of a shelter-in-place drill. I watched in horror as her little cluster of 3- and 4-year-olds crouched down as small as they could get. I watched as my baby pressed her head against the wall and put her hands over her head as if that was going to stop a round from one of these weapons. She was barely out of her toddler years, and yet she was already being taught how to try to survive if someone with a weapon of war comes into the classroom where she was learning her ABCs, believing that their right to fire assault rifles matters more than her right to make it to the age of 5. What I felt was horror, and I know other parents have felt the same as they try to imagine the unimaginable. I've spoken before about researching ballistic backpacks and ballistic whiteboards for my daughters to have in their classrooms, and the fact of the matter is that those pages are bookmarked in my phone. It's not the first time I've looked at them. Facebook's own employees have cited some of their platform's rifle-promoting ads as dangerous and reckless. We cannot and must not allow this to go on another day, another hour. We need the FTC to act. They must begin the investigation, because every minute that we let parasitic companies like this try to trick our babies into buying and asking to be bought weapons of war, we risk witnessing another classroom turning into a massacre. Every moment we let this continue, we risk having to bury yet another first grader in their favorite pair of Converse. Enough. Let's end this sickening marketing strategy. Let's ban, and then we need to ban the sale of military-style assault weapons altogether. Thank you. Myself, 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Watterson, Chicago is home to Midway Airport, Southwest's second largest base of operations, and what happened over Christmas was appalling. We've heard many of these stories already today, and I'm going to add to them because it's important to keep telling these stories, because these are individual human beings who were significantly affected. One Chicagoan who was scheduled to fly with 2 young children to see their grandparents checked their coats and the children's car seats, only to be told their flight was canceled, and because of a staffing shortage, there was no one who could return those essential items to them. Imagine going without coats in Chicago in December. It's dangerous, and so is putting children, small children, in a car without a car seat. It's actually illegal. I don't know what a family like this was supposed to do, or how they were even able to get out of the airport and home safely. Another Southwest customer with stage 4 cancer got stuck in Chicago while trying to fly home for treatment. And the thing that I find so shocking is that while all these delays and cancellations were happening, and passengers were calling Southwest for help, it took hours to reach a live person, if they ever reached a live person at all. Mr. Watterson, will Southwest guarantee that passengers on canceled flights will be able to reach a live person within a reasonable amount of time when they call Southwest for help? Just say yes or no. It's a simple question.
Thank you, Senator. In a normal disruption, we aim for a 3 to 9 minute average speed of answer, and that's how we fund our union-represented call centers. What is
acceptable to you in terms of delay when it's not a normal disruption? 3 days?
Unfortunately, Senator, it was a disservice to all your constituents that we had during that period of time. Despite having all of our people that were available, working and on overtimes, there was no amount of people we could have put in place to handle all the calls at that time because of the scale of the disruption.
Okay, so you won't guarantee that in a canceled flight, especially in an instance like that anybody will be able to reach a live person at Southwest. That's what you're telling me.
Senator, in a day like today or an analogous day, yes, we will be able to. An exact repeat of that situation, I apologize, we can't staff. There's no way we could staff that high.
Okay. So maybe they need to come to a senator and we'll call a hearing and then we'll hand you pieces of paper with names and phone numbers on them. That's how people will get reached. I mean, there are people still waiting to hear from Southwest to reach a live person, and it's been a month.
Oh, I'm deeply sorry, Senator. Our average speed of answer yesterday was 2 minutes, and so we've definitely staffed. And to the extent people are not getting through, I deeply apologize. Then definitely please hand me the piece of paper and I'll follow up.
For someone with a disability, such as a visual impairment, the inability to reach someone by phone at Southwest is especially frustrating. Not all websites and mobile apps are easily accessible for persons with disabilities, despite existing guidelines and industry best practices, and also law, the ADA. Mr. Watterson, when was the last time Southwest reviewed its website and smartphone app to ensure that it is fully accessible for passengers with disabilities?
Senator, thank you for the question. I'm unsure of the exact time that we did that last review. I will say that our Vice President over call centers is visually impaired, and that's a passion point for him.
Okay, well, I want to know when the last time that you reviewed was. If you could just get back to me, that would
Yes,
be
ma'am, I will.
Thank you. Ms. Pinkerton, I'm working on legislation to require the Department of Transportation to audit air carrier website accessibility. Given A4A's recent accessibility efforts, am I safe to presume that I can count on your organization's support for establishing such a requirement?
I'm absolutely happy to work with you on that, Senator Baldwin. I heard you loud and clear in your previous statements, especially about the wheelchair damage. And as you probably are aware, our CEOs recently recommitted to doing better on accessibility issues. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it includes having an advisory committee at each airline, and the disability community is part of that to hear those concerns. We've also committed to retraining all of our frontline employees and improving that training. And we've also committed to, thirdly, working with the disability community, identifying barriers in the planes and studying and trying to develop standards to provide better access. So I just want you to know this has taken on a new level of importance at our organization and our CEOs. We're committed to doing better.
Okay. Well, I look forward to working with you on it. For my final question, what is particularly frustrating about this meltdown is that Captain Murray and others literally warned that Southwest was one bad storm away from suffering serious disruption. Clearly, Southwest failed to heed the warnings of its frontline personnel. And I just have to say that we need to be reminded that the air crews are responsible for people's lives. This is just about lost luggage. These are professionals who commit every day to keeping their passengers safe and to making, not just for getting people from one place to another, but literally to safeguard their lives. And I think we often forget the role that air crew members play. Mr. Watterson, what specific steps is Southwest implementing over the course of this year to earn back the trust of your flight crews, your gate agents, and all the other frontline personnel who were thrown into the breach by this collapse that many of your own personnel predicted could happen at the very next instance of significantly bad weather, and then it did? What are you doing to earn back the trust of your crews and personnel?
Thank you, Senator. That's a very important point for us to do. And so within our lessons learned work, we look at systemic issues we face here. We're involving our union leaders, both in the input stage right now of what their opinions of what went wrong. We had a session with both our flight attendant and pilot unions, as well as our other frontline workforces. And we committed to them that once we have a comprehensive view of what went wrong, we will then share the recommendations out of that and work with them on developing the details of that. Because I think involving them in the work to make sure this doesn't happen again is the best way to show engagement with them and to make sure it doesn't happen again.
I'm going to ask you a question for the record, and I want you to respond to me in writing. Please explain the specific benchmarks Southwest must hit in the coming months and years to fulfill your promise that this will never happen again, and make sure to address how the company will transparently measure progress and hold executives accountable for missing those benchmarks.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I now recognize my colleague from Missouri.
Senator Duckworth. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you and the chairman have talked about the importance of resourcing our missions in the Indo-Pacific, and I think that was a very important conversation. I just want to emphasize the importance of that, particularly with regards to the ASEAN mission itself. I hope your commitment there also extends to Southeast Asia. I believe strongly in the importance of the role that ASEAN plays in regional stability, and believe we should be strengthening our partnerships with ASEAN. That's why I'm going to be traveling to Jakarta this coming week. And, it's also why when I'm there, I'm going to be specifically visiting the mission, the ASEAN mission itself, and to also meet with ASEAN member country leadership. I'll be discussing supply chain transparency, economic cooperation, trade facilitation, labor practices, and defense and maritime security. I look forward to bringing these discussions back to inform my work on this issue. So I just want to emphasize the importance of ASEAN.
Senator, I couldn't agree more with you, and I think it's an incredibly important part of the world, getting even more important. ASEAN and our ASEAN friends and partners are critically important, and I look forward to hearing about your trip and some of the learnings when you come back.
Thank you. I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and it's unfortunate that Senator Haggerty has left because I was going to give him some kudos. One issue that has come up repeatedly in my discussion with our various missions around the world is the problem of accessibility at overseas missions and residences. While the State Department has made considerable efforts to incorporate accessibility features into new design and construction, it has devoted far fewer resources to upgrading existing facilities. I remember on a trip to Japan when Ambassador Haggerty was when my colleague was the ambassador to Japan, and one of the staff members there, when I said there are no accessible bathrooms that I can get to, the response was, "Oh, we're in Japan. This is not the ADA. It doesn't apply to Japan." And I said, "This is American soil. This is the U.S. Embassy." And under then Ambassador Haggerty's leadership, they actually went through and fixed everything. So it was quite wonderful. But I just found out again, since his tenure there, the bathroom in the ambassador's residence is still not accessible. They've put grab bars and all the stuff in there, but the door is still not within ADA. It's not in compliance with the ADA. The lack of accessibility at so many of our facilities is a serious obstacle to the full participation of people with disabilities who want to serve their nation and advance U.S. policy overseas. It also makes it extremely difficult for non-disabled individuals with family members who are disabled to be able to serve our government overseas. Because it is difficult to find accessible facilities and homes abroad, our nation's diplomats often have to make very tough choices, and we must make sure that the best, most qualified people are posted to each of our missions, but they can't do that, and they can't go to the countries where we need them to if such barriers are getting in their way. If confirmed, what steps will you take to make sure that our overseas missions and residences are fully accessible in compliance with the ADA? It's been 32 years since ADA passed, to all U.S. governmental employees and their families. And will you commit to working with me to make concrete progress towards achieving full accessibility?
Yeah, Senator, absolutely, 100%. And it's an incredibly important issue. As you probably know, our facilities are not as up to date as they should be, and this is from a variety of perspectives. And so we need to make sure that our people are not limited in any way by the facilities and where they serve. So I look forward to working with you closely on it. And I will say even more than that, I think accessibility, as you've pointed out many times, is only part of the answer. There is also making sure that we are promoting and retaining and recognizing and advancing people with disabilities throughout the State Department. And I look forward to working with you on that as well.
Thank you. I would also like to ask you about accessibility and the prioritization of disability rights within the State Department here at home. As you know, it's one of the things to be in compliance with the law, but it's another to encourage and cultivate a culture that welcomes, values, and empowers people with disabilities. What actions will you take, if confirmed, to foster such a culture at the State Department here at home?
Yeah, again, I'll just restate this is important to me personally, and I will make sure that this is a priority on my team And I already know it's a priority for Secretary Blinken. I've seen the DEIA strategic plan. I've seen the detailed benchmarks that they're putting in place, some 200 measurable performance measurements on this scale. So accessibility, but again, the whole suite of kind of issues that go with it are going to be very, very important if confirmed.
Thank you. I yield back, Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good afternoon to our witnesses. 2 years ago, gentlemen, I introduced legislation that ensured Guard and Reserve members receive the same monthly incentive pay for maintaining the same critical skills and taking on the same hazardous duties as their counterparts in the active component. Reservists who qualify for these incentive pays work hard to maintain the same skills to the same standards as their active duty counterparts, often on time when they are not technically drilling. Yet they are only currently paid 1/30 of the incentive pay that their active duty counterparts receive. So the situation is, for example, jump pay. You have to do 3 jumps a month as a paratrooper. A reservist goes out, he does his 3 jumps in 1 day. An active duty troop goes out and does his 3 jumps in 1 day. The active duty troops gets $150. The reservist gets $5 for the same 3 jumps. This is an equity issue, and one that I'm glad that my colleagues in this committee voted in an overwhelmingly bipartisan way to address by including my bill in the FY 2022 NDAA. Before implementing this section of the NDAA, though, DoD must submit to Congress a report on its plan for providing equal incentive pays, along with a certification that it will not negatively impact force structure. This report was due 6 months ago, in September 30th of last year, yet Congress is still waiting for this report. Last October, after the deadline passed, I led a bipartisan and bicameral letter to Secretary Austin urging the department to expeditiously issue its report and certification to Congress as required by law. We are still waiting to hear from DoD on this. We're still waiting to pay our reservists equitably for the critical skills and risks that they take to contribute to our military. Under Secretary Cisneros, how close is the department to completing the report? And more importantly, how much longer would you like our nation's reserve component to wait before it is afforded the incentive pay parity with their counterparts on active duty?
Senator, thank you for the question there. And I know I was a former TAR officer, or then which later they changed the name to full-time support in the United States Navy, working with our reservists. I know how hard they work and how dedicated they are to defending the nation. For that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Constable, who can.
Wonderful. Why are you 6 months late?
Senator, this is a conversation that has started many working groups, really, so we're very much aware of the requirement, and apologies for the late report. We do anticipate meeting with the staff soon to talk through some of the impasses that we've reached based primarily on the realization in all camps that not all special skills, not all special pays are created equally or should be treated the same. We just have to find the right mix of places wherein we seek equal dollars versus equal consideration. And of course, cognizant of creating incentives to draw people from one force to the other, as one report has warned. But we do owe you a report, and we do believe we're nearing a solution to propose.
Could you tell that in ordinary people speak as opposed to DoD speak? What's nearing? 6 more months? A year?
I think
you guys are slow rolling this because you don't want to implement it.
Not years, not months, Senator. I think the answer is weeks. Obviously faster when I go back than before I left the building.
Less than 2 months.
I
want to know.
Return back. Yes.
All right.
Yes, Senator. We'll
Will you
certainly
call me
get
back
with the
within a
staff.
week to tell me when the report will come?
I think it's ready for staff. I don't believe, Senator, it's ready for the members quite yet.
When will it be ready for the members? When can you commit to?
I can commit to meeting with the staffs in weeks or less.
I'll give you 4 weeks.
Senator.
You need to do this. And this idea that you can slow roll this and that that an active duty troop is gonna leave the active duty to go to the reserves because he's gonna get $150 extra a month for 3 jumps, it is an insult to the troops who are on active duty. And it's still an insult to the troops who do those same 3 jumps every single month in order to meet those standards. I'm going to move on to my next question. The military services face challenges in meeting their recruiting goals, in part due to a historically small pool of eligible recruits. This year, I'm introducing the Enlist Act.
This legislation enables the Department of Defense to expand its recruiting pool to include individuals like DACA recipients and other longtime residents of this country who can pass a DoD background check and meet the service's high standards for enlistment. While maintaining the department's security standards, the Enlist Act will aid the service's recruitment efforts by allowing highly skilled and motivated individuals to succeed in the military. Undersecretary Cisneros, Mr. Constable, I'd like to hear from each of you whether you think the Enlist Act's expansion of the pool of possible recruits would benefit military recruitment efforts. And as a follow-up for either of you, what other actions has the department undertaken to bolster efforts to recruit diverse talents from across the nation?
Ma'am, Senator, we've tried this before to try, so we are in support of trying to diversify our enlistment pool in order. I know there are a number of kids, young students that have grown up here in the United States that consider themselves American citizens that have really done nothing wrong, have lived good lives, and have want to serve. So this is something that we've looked at in the past, that we tried to move through in the past, and we will continue to try and do it again.
You didn't answer my question. How about Mr. Constable?
Senator, the department would support any effort to expand the recruiting pool, so we look forward to reading the details within your bill. And the $40 million that we spoke of earlier that's contained in the president's budget request for jammers, in one part is really geared toward getting at some more diverse populations. We don't like leaving any money on the table or any population unchecked, especially with all the skills that they bring us or the opportunity to better reflect the American public. So to that end, you should expect to see and demand to see more marketing, more advertising geared towards a broader population, and we look forward to the contents of your bill. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm over time.
That's fine. Thank you. Senator Sullivan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to be on the committee.
Well, thanks to my colleagues, and I want to thank Senator Schumer, who, when we first got this bill out of committee in the last Congress, promised me a floor vote, and then circumstances conspired against us, but his promise didn't have an expiration date on it. And he said when we started into the 118th Congress, keep working and we'll do this. The Iraq War resolution was passed in October of 2002. I was the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, had no interest in being ever in the United States Senate, and certainly didn't know that I one day would be. At that time, I had no idea that my 12-year-old son, oldest son, would become a Marine infantry officer. But I listened to that debate about the Iraq War, and it infuriated me. It infuriated me that it was being forced on Congress right before a midterm election. The invasion didn't start till March. There was nothing about that debate that was sort of according to Hoyle. There was no reason it should be put into a midterm election context, but that's what happened, and it so angered me that when I eventually got elected to the United States Senate in 2012, I fought to get on the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee so that I could work with colleagues to try to get Congress to take more seriously the grave responsibility in Article 1 that we shouldn't go to war without a vote of Congress. Iraq is no longer an enemy. You followed, Secretary Austin was there last week, a very productive meeting with Prime Minister al-Sudani to talk about the work we're doing with Iraq to continue to battle against ISIS and other non-state terrorist organizations, to check Iranian aggression, to promote regional stability. There's no reason to have a war authorization against a nation that is now a security partner. So after 20 years, it's time to repeal this and show again that Congress can exercise that Article 1 muscle. There's more to do in this space, but if we begin with this repeal, and then hopefully with a good bipartisan vote, send a message that can gain some momentum in the House as well, where we have very broad bipartisan sponsorship, Congress can start to take back this power that is the most sacred one we have and that we should jealously guard. Let me now introduce my foreign relations colleague, who is a warfighter and a hero and a superb senator, the senator from Illinois, Tammy Duckworth.
Behind you here. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. You know, in 2012, I first started talking to Senator Kaine about this because as he was being sworn into the Senate, I was being sworn into the House and onto the House Armed Services Committee. And I wanted to talk about ending the AUMF because I think it is the best way that we can support our troops. Look, most people run away from battle, but our service members run toward it. They watch their brothers and sisters get wounded. They miss births and funerals, school plays and college graduations. Then they come home bearing the wounds of war, both visible and otherwise. They will always do their job, our servicemen and women, defending our country, no matter the sacrifice. So they deserve to know that they have the moral support and most current legal backing of this nation. But for more than 20 years, Washington has failed to give them that. One of Congress's most solemn duties is deciding when and how we send Americans into combat by debating and passing authorizations for the use of military force. These documents set the legal framework for military action that are supposed to define the mission for the Americans who are going downrange. But lately, too many in these halls of power in Washington have shrugged off that duty, hiding behind this outrageously outdated document. They've been scared of the political risks that come with bringing these wars back into the spotlight. They've been staring down election days. Congress has shirked its responsibility to our troops. For more than 20 years since passing these AUMFs, those in power have stretched and skewed their original intent. We've left our troops without a clearly defined mission, without clearly defined parameters, without an off-ramp. So now they face an increasing risk that a future commander-in-chief may improperly interpret the law to send them into future armed conflicts that this AUMF was never intended to authorize. Our troops deserve better than that. If we choose to send the finest among us into battle, then we need to debate and vote to do so based on current conditions. Enough of being more worried about political consequences than about our troops in harm's way. And until we muster up the courage in these halls of power to ask and answer the tough questions that will actually tell our troops what they're fighting for, we will not be living up to their sacrifices. Instead, we will be leaving them in an endless loop, refusing even to look for that off-ramp. Look, it really shouldn't be that hard. Anyone who claims the mantra of patriotism can't keep demanding such sacrifices from our service members while refusing to step up to our obligation, our responsibility, to have a public debate and vote when we ask our troops to go into combat. It's time, it's long past time, that we repeal this decades-old AUMF and start honoring the troops in the way that they deserve, maybe with a little courage ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Schmidt, Senator Duckworth, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just have to say I had a wonderful working relationship with Senator Blunt, who has recently retired. And I would have to say, Senator Smith, I agree with you with your concerns on the Indo-Pacific region. And in fact, my question, gentlemen, is going to follow up a little bit on my colleague's line of questioning. But I did want to start with saying that, Mr. Assistant Secretary and General Fulton, your written testimony references the first soft truth: humans are more important than hardware. And I couldn't agree with this more. And 2 weeks ago, I led a CODEL to Japan and Indonesia. My interactions on that trip reinforced just how important those alliances and partnerships are. We must not forget that human ties are the United States' strategic advantage in the Indo-Pacific region, and these human relationships are critical to countering malign CCP activity in that region. General Fenton, I appreciated our discussion last week, and can you please elaborate furthermore in that questioning line and on an unclassified level on how the SOF community fosters close relationships with our allies and partners? Specifically, how does Special Operations Command's ongoing work with other nations, from the smallest unit operations all the way up through your leadership-to-leadership relationships with military leaders in some of these countries, reinforce our campaign plans in Southeast Asia?
Senator, thank you. And I really appreciate our discussion as well, and I appreciate your reference in that. I'll start with just emphasizing that partners and allies are absolutely a key focus for the department, the secretary, and for your Special Operations Command team. And I put that in contrast to what China's focus may be in terms of clients or customers. We're about partnerships. We're about friendships. We're about the power of many's to make us all stronger. And I think we see that in the way that we approach. Firstly, your Special Operations team, as you mentioned, we start very, very much from a perspective of it's in our training and in our schoolhouses to work through these, because we recognize it's the speed of trust. It's the speed of relationship in many ways with partners and teammates around the world. You'll see us at a very tactical level, and I won't mention any countries, and certainly Senator could talk more in a closed session. You'll see us at a tactical level doing events like training, shooting, jumping, driving, building capabilities that use the tools that this committee has honored us with. I think at an organizational level, we'll be showing folks how we've grown ourselves in the 20-plus years of combat, what it meant to weave in technology, how we understand gathering of intelligence, how we understand mission-type orders. And I think at the institutional level, what you'll see your special operations team do in any of the COCOMs is work with the COCOMs to ensure that the nation we have a relationship with understands its special operations forces and what they can do, the types of missions, and if I may be, the return on investment and the value that they will bring that nation in a way that I believe we certainly bring this nation.
Thank you, General. Turning now to General Nakasone. General, I just want to say I too have complete trust in your ability to do your job. And in fact, your forward-leaning posture allowed us to keep tabs on the well-being of my constituent who was held in Haqqani Network hands and also in his safe return. So thank you very much for the work of you and your subordinates in that. I want to talk about the cyber domain. Of course, it has no boundaries. I include legislation in fiscal year 2021 NDAA authorizing DoD to establish a pilot program to enhance the cybersecurity of our allies, and in particular, the readiness of military forces of Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. And this year, I plan to expand that program to include Malaysia and the Philippines. Could you elaborate on specifically why the cybersecurity of our allies and partners is important for U.S. overall, U.S. national security, and if possible, can you comment on the value of direct engagement with our overseas partners to help build their cyber skills and how that is important for our own national security?
Certainly, Senator. I think that there's no better example than Ukraine. We've watched this now for over a year. We're a very capable partner that was able to raise their level of cybersecurity, was able to fend off a much larger foe. But it's not only that, it's also the ability for us to share information with that partner. We want to be able to share our information in the future, and being able to share information in cyberspace means that you have to have an assurance that the partner can secure your information. And that's a critical piece, and I know that the work that you've done to drive that type of cybersecurity, both from the element of the bar has to go higher for our partners to operate, but also we have to have the confidence that we share information, that our information is between us and that partner.
Thank you. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Duckworth. Senator Scott, please.
I now recognize myself for the first line of questioning. Dr. Luthi, thank you for your service on the Women in Aviation Advisory Board. I find it incredibly frustrating that only 2.6% of aviation mechanics in the United States are women. And that representation of women as a percentage of the total number of aviation maintenance technicians has barely budged over the past decade. We just aren't making the kind of progress that we need. And it's even more discouraging that this is happening when we face such an acute need to grow the workforce. I know how critical it is to conduct outreach to young women while they're still in school to help broaden their horizons and hopefully inspire and prepare these young Americans for potentially high-paid careers in aviation mechanic work. The Aviation Workforce Development Grant Program provides funding for this type of outreach of education. Dr. Luthi, could you explain the return on investment that Congress could expect if it dramatically increased Aviation Workforce Development Grant Program funding to meet industry demand and help broaden outreach to more Americans, particularly young women?
Certainly. Absolutely, maintenance is definitely a clear area, as we talked about earlier, of talent crisis. So as mentioned, 3% of maintenance technicians are women. I will say there's a slight bit of good news on that front. So the most recent ATEC report that came out had the percentage of graduates from aviation maintenance technical schools at 9%. So
ooh, we've doubled.
Exactly. I mean, it's triple, but we're still in the single digits. Yep. And one of the things that came out of that report that was very disturbing to me also is that only 42% of the graduates from these schools are actually going on and doing the A&P certification. So although it's 9% graduates, that's not really going to convert to a big increase in women in maintenance numbers. So workforce development grants are something that we talk about in the board report and highly recommend expansion of workforce development grants as a tool to help us draw in and more workforce and a broader representation in workforce, in particular women, to the aviation industry. So those grants give us the ability to, as you mentioned, expand in education and awareness. We know this is a key area, is to get people introduced, women introduced to aviation, particularly at a young age. So over half of women surveyed, for example, in aviation said that one of the major influencing factors for them choosing aviation was getting introduced to it as a young girl or a young woman. So it's essential. Workforce development grants give us the opportunity to do that, and they also give us the opportunity to not have to reinvent the wheel. So there are some really great programs that we have for outreach for youth. Everything from, I'm AWAM, but Girls in Aviation Day, and Organization Black Aerospace Professionals with Girls Launch, Young Eagles, of course, EA, but there's lots of programs that are out there for aviation outreach, and one of the things that the development grants allow us to do is to capitalize on what already exists, expand it, deepen it, broaden it, and really have the opportunity to recruit and retain more women into aviation.
Thank you. Captain Ambrosi, can you give us ALPA's view on this, on the return on investment in Congress? I'm afraid that we are sending a message that aviation workforce development is a low priority when most applicants don't receive the requested funding. Can you speak a little bit about what you think the return on investment would be if we drastically scaled up aviation workforce development grant funding from the $10 million a year it is right now to better approach the scale of need, which seems closer to $100 million a year?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. First, let me thank you for your opening comments on preventing special interests from rolling back safety regulations. But on this topic, ALPA absolutely supports in increasing funding to get women and underrepresented groups involved in aviation. This is a great profession. It's something to be proud of. We need to reach out to these folks. I have an 8-year-old daughter that I hope has an easier ability to get into this business than females in my generation did, over 30 years ago when I started in this process. So absolutely, ALPA does outreach. We go to everything from elementary schools. We've done over 2,000 visits from elementary schools up to higher education. So we absolutely support and believe there is an excellent return on investment.
Thank you. Dr. Utash, I understand you sought one of these grants and did not receive it, and that is unfortunately a common experience. Can you speak a little bit about the need to increase the grant program?
Certainly, thank you. We have applied the last 2 rounds, and we have not received it. But I also have reviewed the proposals of those that received, which absolutely are great workforce programs. But I also perused all of the ones that did not receive funding, and so we would absolutely support the additional funding. There wasn't a proposal in that group that did not have a good return on investment, in my personal opinion. In ours, what we were trying to do was with the recent changes in the FAA regulations for the maintenance program, was to be able to take the general part of aviation across the state of Kansas to all of our high schools. That's a broad reach and a large net that can be cast. And every single one of those proposals that I perused and looked at, I thought had a great return on investment. So we would highly encourage from education that funding be expanded.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, most people run from battle, but our service members run towards it. They watch their brothers and sisters get wounded. They miss births and funerals, school plays, and college graduations. Then they come home bearing the wounds of war, both visible and otherwise. They will always do their job defending our country, no matter the sacrifice. So they deserve to know that they have the moral support and legal backing of this great nation. But for more than 20 years, Washington has failed to give them that. One of Congress's most solemn duties is deciding when and how we send Americans into combat by debating and passing the authorization for use of military force. Documents that set the legal framework for military action that are supposed to define the mission of our Americans that we send downrange. But lately, Too many in these halls have shrugged off that duty, hiding behind outrageously outdated AUMFs that were used to launch the Gulf and Iraq wars all the way back in 1991 and 2002. Scared of the political risks that come with bringing these wars back into the spotlight, staring down upcoming election days, Congress has shirked its responsibility to our troops, skewing the original intent of these documents. And in doing so, we've left our troops without a clearly defined mission. And now, they face an increasing risk that a future commander-in-chief may improperly interpret the law to send them into armed conflicts that these AUMFs were never intended to authorize. Our troops deserve better than that. If we choose to send our finest into battle, then we here in these halls need to debate and vote to do so based on current conditions. Enough of being more worried about political consequences than about our troops in harm's way. And until we muster up the courage to ask and answer the tough questions that will actually tell our service members what they're fighting for, we won't be living up to their sacrifices. Instead, we'll be leaving them in an endless loop, refusing to even look for an off-ramp. Look, I know guys and gals, buddies whom I served with in Iraq, who did 6-7 rotations between Iraq and Afghanistan. They went in knowing that they'd probably be back in a couple of years, living the hardships of combat deployments over and over again, risking the unimaginable sun up and sun down, year in and year out, tour after tour, all because their country said that it needed them to. They deserve more from us than to be forced to wonder whether the same outdated AUMF that has already sent them overseas half a dozen times will be misused once again to put them in harm's way, without members of Congress even having a conversation to decide whether such sacrifice is warranted. This shouldn't be hard. Anyone who claims the mantle of patriotism can't keep demanding such sacrifices from our service members while refusing to step up to our obligation, our responsibility to have a public debate and vote when we ask our troops to go into combat. Are their lives not worth a vote? Not even worth a discussion? To me, part of the problem lies in the growing disconnect between those who serve and those who overseas and those who serve on the Hill. Right now in Washington, we just don't have as many members of Congress with combat experience the way we did in the years after Vietnam. The era when those returning from war would put down their rucks, hang up their uniforms, and head to the Capitol building to serve their country in a different kind of way. The era when John McCain and John Kerry would reach across the aisle to solve some of our nation's biggest problems because both of them were more concerned with doing right by the troops who protected us than brandishing partisan labels. But now, far fewer veterans come to Washington, and the divide has sharpened, with those sitting in hallowed houses of power ever more removed from those sent off to battle. Well, I can tell you this. It's a whole lot easier to cover your eyes and avoid taking tough votes if you've never shed blood in the dust and grit and horror of a war zone. If you've never held your family close before heading off on yet another tour, kissing your loved ones for what you know could be the last time. But today, there are just a handful of us in the Senate who've been in combat. The same is true for our country at large, as the same families keep volunteering to serve generation after generation. In Vietnam, because of the draft, a boy from rural Missouri could have ended up in a fighting position next to someone from the upper echelons of New York society. Of course, the rich could get out of service then too. Our former president's bone spurs proved that. But in that bygone era, service touched nearly every corner of this country, regardless of tax bracket or race or education. Now it falls onto the shoulders of the same families to volunteer time and again, or it gets foisted upon those who've fallen on hard times, service as a mean of escaping poverty. So the gap widens, with the vast majority of Americans never having served and having little idea what it's like, other than what they see from Hollywood. And so the disconnect yawns, with it becoming even easier for most of us to live our lives blissfully detached from the nightmarish reality of war. We have to do more to bridge this divide. True patriotism isn't measured by how long of a standing ovation one gives our military on a single day in November each and every year. Real, lasting, meaningful patriotism requires doing the hard work necessary to actually change our country, to make it a better, fairer place where sacrifices aren't borne by just a few, but instead carried by all. Our troops are willing to sacrifice anything, everything, for their country. They fought for us time after time, tour after tour after tour. It's time that we fight for them too. It's time that we repeal these decades-old AUMFs and start honoring our heroes in the way that they deserve, showing just an ounce of the courage that they show over and over again. God bless our troops in harm's way. God bless our veterans. And always, God bless the United States of America. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
One of the most important things we can do to make American aviation more sustainable is increase the supply of American-grown, American-made sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF. SAF presents an incredible opportunity to support a critical industry in our nation's heartland. Policies that grow sustainable aviation fuel sources stemming from America's agricultural bounty represents a true win-win solution that supports domestic farmers and blenders while also reducing our carbon footprints across all modes of transportation. However, as has already been discussed, success is far from guaranteed. I'm troubled that outdated and inaccurate environmental models may prevent America's corn and soybean farmers from being a part of comprehensive climate solution. That is why I strongly believe that the forthcoming FAA reauthorization must require the federal government to use the most up-to-date life cycle emissions model, such as Argonne National Lab's GREAT model, that accurately consider crops, land uses, and carbon reduction practices in the United States. I mean, for example, ethanol produced in the US using advanced precision farming methods plus carbon capture sequestration is much closer to being net carbon neutral than ethanol from Brazil, where rainforests are being cut down and high carbon emitting inputs are being used. Executive Director Welsh, how important is it to make sure that our life cycle emissions models account for real-world crop, land use, and carbon reduction practices to ensure that we don't waste the game-changing potential of SAF to cut emissions by putting American-grown crops to work fueling our aircraft and other vehicles?
Thank you, Senator. This is a very important topic. Ensuring accurate life cycle emissions reductions from sustainable aviation fuels is critical to credibly establishing their environmental benefit. So under the Sustainable Aviation Fuels Grand Challenge that I mentioned, the agencies have defined SAF as those fuels that meet at least a 50% life cycle benefit. And directly to your question, when it comes to measuring the life cycle emissions, it is important to have objective, accurate, clear, credible criteria, and as you mentioned, up-to-date criteria for producers and users to meet. And absolutely, all American-grown crops are potentially eligible feedstocks if they can deliver those emissions reduction benefits and should be considered eligible. Thank you.
Thank you. My second question, it has to do with hydrogen fuels. The Midwestern Hydrogen Partnership estimates that hydrogen could become a $130 to $170 billion a year industry in the United States by 2050. Emerging hydrogen and fuel cell markets present an opportunity to stimulate economic growth in my home state of Illinois, as well as other states, and improve the environmental health for the whole planet. In particular, the Midwest boasts a large manufacturing base that could rapidly adapt to producing products for hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. Mr. Gordon and Mr. Miftakhov, what more can Congress do to reduce barriers towards hydrogen development and help unleash the potential for greener energy and job growth? Let's start with Mr. Gordon.
Senator Duckworth, thank you very much for the question, and I absolutely agree with everything that you said. Look, I think we just need parity right now. The programs are in place for new aviation platforms, but right now it does feel like hydrogen aviation is being excluded. So I'm just asking for parity.
Thank you. Mr. Miftakhov?
And thank you, Senator Duckworth, for the question. From my side, again, it's the other flavor of parity is the
setting up the right metrics for success. What might work for some of the ground transport works differently for aviation due to difference in the environmental footprint of aviation because of the high altitude emissions. So some of the combustion of fuels is more harmful for aviation, in case of aviation, than ground transport, and that needs to be reflected. The fuel cells specifically, or hydrogen electric approach, represents the best of all possible worlds because, and there are multiple third-party studies on this by now, it's 90 to 95% full life cycle abatement of all harmful effects of aviation. And this is the magnitude that we need, because if we continue combusting, even if it's SAF, even if it's a completely net zero carbon fuels, we still have all non-carbon effects of this. And it's actually, combustion is less efficient than the fuel cell-based propulsion. For small aircraft, economically, 3 times worse than fuel cells. For large aircraft, twice as bad, economically, without even talking about emissions. So fuel cells represent a huge opportunity, not just for aviation, but around the all types of transport, but for aviation especially. And we think that the United States leadership in this area will be quite critical for the world's transition.
And thank you. And I recognize Senator Budd for his questions.
I thank the chair. And again, I thank the panel for being here today. You know, North Carolina is a leader in aviation, has been for about 100 years. We like to say that.
I now recognize myself for the first round of questions. I know today's hearing is on consumer issues, so I want to start by talking about consumer safety. Senator Baldwin and I introduced emergency vacating of the Aircraft Cabin Act, the AVAC Act, to require the FAA to establish evacuation standards that take real-life conditions like the presence of carry-on bags, children, seniors and passengers with disabilities into account. Ms. Nelson, if I could just have a quick yes or no to the following 3 questions, I'll give you time to elaborate afterwards. First, have you ever been on a flight where there were no carry-on bags?
No.
Have you ever been on a flight, or what percentage of flights that you worked did not have children under the age of 18, seniors over the age of 60, or persons with disabilities?
0%.
Do you think FAA simulation testing is effective?
No.
Thank you. Now, can you briefly explain why it is so important for the FAA to conduct simulation tests with real-life conditions? And I just want to start by saying that the FAA's current way of doing it is to take a fuselage, put 60 people on it, nobody over the age of 60, nobody under the age of 18, no carry-on bags, and no disabilities, and they say they can evacuate, that simulates a real condition. So can you speak to why it's important to actually simulate real-life conditions?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. So the evacuation standards are not, first of all, do not take into account the current conditions in the cabin. The full aircraft, the seats that are closer together, the iPads and tablets that are out everywhere with cords, the growing accessibility, frankly, to everyone who's on the plane. And if we don't take into consideration the actual conditions in the cabin today, we are going to have a test in real live aviation where people will lose their lives. We do not want to test this for the first time in an actual event. So we need to take into consideration there are different issues that can be brought into the simulation of whether or not an aircraft can be evacuated in that amount of time. There has been concern in the past about utilizing children and elderly people and people with disabilities in the evacuation tests themselves, but those can be entered into the simulation process and at least considered. We should also be considering fumes in the cabin and any other obstructed objects and the issue of carry-on bags. None of that is considered in the evacuation certification process right now, and that is why your bill is so critically important to determine what the actual conditions are today in the cabin and how we can safely evacuate people in an emergency.
Thank you. We certainly test the safety of automobiles with crash test dummies to simulate babies in car seats and people with disabilities. So certainly you can introduce human analogous dummies into the process. Thank you.
Agreed.
Last year, my friend, former Congressman Jim Langevin, was attempting to lead a House Armed Services Committee congressional delegation when Lufthansa refused to allow him to board because its employees at the gate were confused about whether his wheelchair battery was allowed on the flight.
It did not matter that the United States Navy had already confirmed with the airline before the trip that his wheelchair specifications were permissible. And confusion isn't just limited to batteries. It can also be about something as simple as what size wheelchairs can fit on which kind of plane due to varying cargo capacity. This is incredibly frustrating and frankly unnecessary. It was my friend and hero, the late Judy Heumann, who brought this issue to my attention. I am writing a provision for FAA reauthorization inspired by Judy that would require carriers to provide passengers with disabilities basic transparency and information. Ms. Ansley, if airlines were required to post basic information on their websites and apps like the size of their cargo holds, where both passengers and gate agents could easily reference it, would that help minimize confusion and make travel more predictable for passengers with mobility aids?
Thank you for the question, Chair Duckworth. It certainly would help to provide customers with more information about the experience that they're going to have during flight. Judy Heumann was a great friend to all of us, and I have had the privilege of advocating with her because she had so many issues traveling the world by using her wheelchair. And having the opportunity to know not only how, what aircraft her device would fit on safely, but also, quite frankly, working toward the goal of being able to just simply fly from your wheelchair would be a great opportunity to solve those issues.
Thank you. Is the disability community satisfied with the current level of accessibility at our nation's airports? Do you think more needs to be done in terms of elevators, ramps, accessible restrooms, that kind of thing?
Yes, more does need to be done in the airport context to improve accessibility. We hear a lot about charging stations at gates not being accessible to people who use wheelchairs, announcements that folks can't hear, counters that are not at correct heights, the accessible restrooms that everybody seems to like to go in with their luggage that require people with wheelchairs to wait until they're available. There's still more that can be done, and we hope that airports will be even more proactive in increasing access.
Thank you. I now recognize the Ranking Member Cruz for his questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the issue of diversity, I think it is important to note that greater diversity within the military does make our military more effective. I'll just give you one example. To have in the Hawaii National Guard native Tagalog-speaking personnel who can blend in with the local population in the remote islands of the Philippines in the hunt for Islamic extremists is helpful. The fact that the Illinois National Guard has Polish-speaking personnel who can actually be in Ukraine helping train Ukrainians because we have those language abilities is good for military readiness. I speak Thai. The fact that I could speak with my Thai military counterparts when I was wearing the uniform of this great nation was helpful to military readiness. To have native Thai speaking and Indonesian speaking soldiers who can participate in Cobra Gold and in Garuda Shield is helpful to this nation and in fact helps with our readiness. I want to thank Mr. Chairman and thank our witnesses for appearing today. As you noted in your statements in response to my colleagues' questions, the services are struggling to meet their recruiting goals, in part due to a historically small pool of eligible recruits. And I appreciate your department's efforts to address the many causes of this problem, but I do think we need to also talk about other ways to expand that recruiting pool. This year, I'm introducing the Enlist Act. This legislation will allow the Department of Defense to expand its recruiting pool to include individuals like DACA recipients and other longtime residents in this country who can pass a DoD background check and meet the service's high standards for enlistment. So we don't lower the standards at all. In fact, we require them to meet the standards. While maintaining the department's security standards, the Enlist Act will aid the service's recruitment efforts by allowing a highly skilled and motivated individuals to succeed in the military. Who would be the people who could do this? DACA folks, dreamers, people who came here on an education visa and attended an American university and now cannot get a work visa here would be likely to be able to qualify for this. To all of our witnesses, I'd like to hear from each of you whether you think the Enlist Act's expansion of the pool of possible recruits would benefit military recruitment efforts, especially since it does not lower the standards and you must pass the background checks.
Senator Duckworth, I'm familiar with the legislation. I'm committed to working with you, as I am with the rest of the department, to ensure that we can address the ultimate goal here, which is how do we expand the pool of qualified and interested and engaged applicants to join the armed forces. I will just say that, certainly there's ways we can work through the considerations that you identified in your question, such as making sure that we provide the right background checks and that they meet our standards. In addition, I'll just note that how we engage a broader set of the population is also really important for us. So in the Army in this last year, looking at just lawful permanent residents, we're undertaking a different campaign with Army Recruiting Command, where we're specifically looking for soldiers with those backgrounds to be able to engage with those communities, often in their specific native languages, to be able to attract them to come and join the Army.
Thank you. Secretary Raven?
Thank you, Senator. Same answer. Expanding the pool of candidates is very important to the Navy and Marine Corps. And let me tell you just one story. I visited a ship recently where I saw a sailor who was a little bit older than you'd expect. He had grown up in Nigeria, came to this country, got a green card, and was just inspired by what the Navy could offer him. And so he joined and is now beginning his time in the Navy. It's an inspiring story, especially for someone who grew up so far away. So I think offering these types of opportunities to more people is a very worthy goal.
Thank you. Secretary Jones?
Senator, I agree that any path to expanding the pool of applicants that can meet our high standards is valuable. So we look forward to working with you to see how these types of efforts can progress. And within the Air Force, we're also looking at a path to naturalization for those who come and serve. We have a pilot that's going on at our basic military training in that regard. And so I think that's a similar intent to what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you. I want to pull a thread that several of my colleagues have raised related to the recent Army survey. When asked to compare different potential barriers to service, respondents weighed most heavily on the idea that they'd be putting the rest of their lives on hold if they joined the military. The reserve components can give individuals the opportunity to serve in the military while also pursuing a civilian career. As a member of the reserve component my entire military career, I was working on a PhD, trying to join the Foreign Service until an RPG changed my life trajectory. Like my colleague, Senator Ernst, my reserve service was an integral part of my life, but not an interruption. Yet the reserve components have largely also struggled to meet recruiting goals. To all the witnesses, can you speak to your strategy for reaching potential recruits who may be interested in becoming reservists as opposed to serving an active component? And what steps can you take to improve your marketing efforts and better message the specific benefits of a special role in the reserve component, that's reserve forces and National Guard, to our national defense?
Senator Duckworth, I fully agree with you, and I think one of the first things that we did starting last year was to surge the marketing and advertising budget and the number of recruiters that are working on specific recruiting for the reserve component. I think another thing that we need to do in response to this specific issue is to address and identify and educate on the range of career options and flexibilities that a career in Army Reserve would afford a young American. Whether you've had some college experience, you have experience in a certain career field, and you want to learn something different, this is a place where you can possibly learn and get training to achieve your career ambitions, even if you want to try something different.
Thank you, Senator. In the last year, we've stood up Naval Reserve Recruiting Command to focus on those opportunities for those who may want to serve in the Navy part-time. You will also see more targeted advertising. Previously, the Navy had, join the Navy, see the world. We're focusing more on the opportunities to join the Naval Reserves, and the Marine Corps has had a very strong Marine Reserve recruiting program for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Senator, we also have launched new recruiting campaigns for both the Air Force Reserve and Air National Guard. We appreciate the additional funding in 23 that will allow us to continue those efforts. One thing that we have seen as a challenge that's impacting our numbers is our high retention that is impacting those who previously served moving on to the Guard and Reserves. So we're having to expand the pool that we consider for the Guard and Reserve for those who have never previously served and looking for new ways to do that. But again, appreciate the additional efforts from the Congress that allow us to do that.
Thank you. As I yield back to the chairman, I also want to mention the Lionesses who demonstrated the importance of having diversity, because to have that all-female Marine Corps unit allowed us to gather intelligence and interact with women in Afghanistan in a way that all-male units could never do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Senator Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, welcome. One of the consistent messages I hear from our partners in the region is the exceptional value they place on United States provided training, whether through the Fulbright program, the YSEALI program, the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, or the IMET program. through DoD. I know that English language training also remains in high demand to help improve interoperability and facilitate future collaboration. These programs build relationships that leave positive impacts over decades as recipients move into senior leadership positions in their own countries. Assistant Secretary Crittenbrink, how does this, welcome, good to see you again, by the way. How does this budget expand our ability to offer these key programs and others like them to our Indo-Pacific allies and partners, and what more can we be doing?
Senator Duckworth, ma'am, nice to see you again. Yes. Thank you very much for your question. I couldn't agree more that I think people-to-people ties forms a bedrock for almost every bilateral relationship that we have in the region. You outlined many of the key exchange programs. There are many more, of course, Fulbright, Waisili, IMET, and others. In the President's budget request, it includes a 13% increase in our diplomatic engagement budget, and that covers both our staffing across the region and also our public diplomacy program. So if you would like further details on exactly what would be involved, I'd be happy to come back to you with that. But we do agree with you that it's building people-to-people ties, and it's also being active in the information space to counter lots of the disinformation coming from various parts of the region that we think are vitally important for our long-term interests. But we're very much committed to people-to-people ties.
Thank you, and do come back with me with more
will,
detail. I do want to continue on a topic I discussed with Administrator Power last week regarding how this budget request helps prioritize consistent, clean, safe drinking water access for the priority countries. And I understand the priority list includes countries like Indonesia and Philippines. Assistant Administrator Schiffer, can you share more details with us regarding the investments and activities planned in both of these countries, Philippines and Indonesia, under the U.S. Global Water Strategy? And specifically, I'd like to hear a bit about how USAID has found success prioritizing local partners and local solutions that result in lasting improvements with domestic partners.
Thank you for that question, Senator. Working with local communities through the administrator's focus on localization so that we're pushing programs out to those that know best the problems that they face so that we can work with them to help build their capacity to face them is at the heart of much of the work that we do. And that's for water and sanitation as well as across a whole range of our works. On the programs in Indonesia and the Philippines specifically, I'll be happy to get back to you because we are still very much in keeping with the spirit of the localization effort and consulting and working with local partners so that we're taking on board their priorities as we develop those programs. We're still in the process of determining the pathway forward. But I can tell you that we have had tremendous success in Vietnam, as Assistant Secretary Crittenbrink knows from his time there, as well as in the Pacific Islands, in working with local communities on clean water and sanitation issues. And that is an area that we get a tremendous return on our foreign assistance and development dollars for building better relationships in those countries that then have all sorts of additional overflow equities for our diplomatic posture.
If you could get back to me at a later point with your plans on clean water initiatives in Indonesia and Philippines in particular, I'd appreciate it.
We'd be happy to.
Thank you. Secretary Crittenbrink, I want to talk to you about accessibility, ADA compliance. The lack of accessibility at so many of our facilities is a serious obstacle to full participation in the State Department with persons with disabilities, both for our own staff, but also when we host host nation members at events at the embassies. And it's also really tough for individuals with family members who may be disabled. When I went to Japan a couple years ago, I found the mission to not be accessible. I was offered to stay in a hotel room that I was told was going to be accessible. I got there, it was not accessible. My entire CODEL had to move it very late in the evening to a different hotel. This last time that I went to Japan, I was offered a hotel room. Luckily, before we went, that was the same one that was found to be not accessible the last time I was there. And we flagged it, and we were put in one that was accessible. I saw that the State Department's FY24 budget request, and by the way, I think that the ambassador's residence is still not fully accessible in Japan. Yeah. I saw that the State Department's FY24 budget request includes $5 million for the accessible housing program, through which the department intends to provide at least one residence accessible to employees with disabilities at every post with a housing pool. Of those posts with a housing pool, how many missions in the EAP region currently lack accessible housing? And given the current funding available, how long do you expect it would take the department to ensure at least one accessible residence at every such mission in your region?
Senator, thank you very much for raising this very important issue. I'll need to take that back and come back to you with the details. I know that we're committed across the U.S. government and across our Bureau to make sure that our facilities are accessible. But I'll need to take that back to come back with you on the details. I do know that we've worked very hard to make our facilities accessible. It sounds to me like, based on your direct experience, we have a long ways to go. But I'm happy to take that back, and I'll get you a specific answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Blinken, for appearing here today. The meeting earlier this week of the leaders of our two main strategic competitors demonstrates the continued urgency of our nation having a diplomatic corps that is second to none. I thank you for your efforts to make this a reality and look forward to engaging more to support our ongoing progress towards this goal. I want to start with my concern with the PRC's actions across the Indo-Pacific, from the Mekong River to the South China Sea to the Pacific Island nations. And it's no secret that the PRC is using economic coercion and expanding their diplomatic presence in this key area. And reality dictates that countries in this region cannot ignore the PRC's presence and proximity. And yet, I still hear from our allies and partners about how the United States remain a strong partner of choice. And you've mentioned this before. I also hear from Southeast Asian partners specifically about how central ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is to their regional identity and as a shield against dominance by foreign powers. My colleague, Senator Merkley, mentioned the importance of ASEAN and the roles that it plays beyond an economic organization. For example, the work that it is doing to hold Burma accountable for the fine points concerns. And in February, I led a CODEL to Jakarta to engage with ASEAN as an institution and with the Indonesia bilaterally. There I saw firsthand the eagerness of our partners for more, not less, U.S. engagement, particularly on economic affairs. Secretary Blinken, can you provide a candid analysis of your department's relationship-building initiatives with key allies and partners in Southeast Asia, particularly with organizations like ASEAN, and in particular ASEAN itself, and explain how this budget will improve our ability to advance our Indo-Pacific objectives?
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the question. First, just very quickly, as you know very well, this is a critical area for us. We've got 50% of the world's population in the Indo-Pacific. We've got 60% of its GDP. We have a region that is driving basically 75% of economic growth over the last 5 or 6 years. So this is vital to us. As it happens, China invests about 50% of its assistance programs and its economic and diplomatic resources in the Indo-Pacific. So we have to be there, first and foremost, and that goes to the efforts that we're doing, and the chairman referenced it at the start. We may not be able to match China person for person, but we're going to be engaged in ways that we haven't been. We're significantly increasing our diplomatic presence in the Pacific Islands. As you know, we've opened in the Solomon Islands. We're looking at other embassies in Tonga and in Kiribati. And at the same time, we have very significantly re-engaged ASEAN, including President Biden, having an extraordinary summit meeting with the ASEAN countries precisely because we think it's an important institution for working together to deal with some of these challenges. At the same time, this goes back to the budget, we want to make sure that we're appropriately resourced so that when it comes to countries throughout the region that have interests and have needs and may be looking to us to be a strong partner, we actually have something to offer. And it's less about, as I said, forcing them to choose. It's more about giving them a choice. And the budget is really designed in that way when it comes, for example, to having the resources to invest coherently in infrastructure, to dealing with building climate resilience and adaptation. The Pacific Island countries, of course, some of them literally at risk of no longer existing if they're not able to deal with that. We have the programs in place, and the budget supports that to be able to do that. But also their own diplomatic and political weight is important, and marshaling that on a given problem, whether it's Burma or whether it's some of the actions that China engages in that they don't like and we don't like, there is much more power and effectiveness in engaging these issues together than there is any one of these countries doing it alone. That's why ASEAN itself is important. One of the things that they've worked on for years, as you know, with China is a code of conduct in the maritime space. I think China's been dragging that along for a long time. We tried to help reinforce that. For example, the State Department put out last year the definitive legal analysis of all of the maritime claims to basically help countries push back against some of the egregious assertions by China in their maritime space. In very practical ways, as I mentioned earlier, we're working to give them the tools and resources to have better what's called maritime domain awareness. They have better visibility on their own seas and oceans, for example, to detect illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, which is devastating economies and livelihoods in a large part of the region. So across a whole series of things, we are working together, and the budget attempts to reflect the importance of that work.
Does the budget include an increase to our mission to ASEAN?
I don't know if it actually has an increase in what's needed for the mission. I believe that we're appropriately resourced, but let me come back to you on that. And if you've identified any deficiencies, I'm happy to hear them. We sent someone very experienced, very close to the president, to be our representative to ASEAN, and who was the executive secretary of the National Security Council, who's been doing a terrific job. I've engaged repeatedly in person, as well as, of course, remotely with all of our ASEAN colleagues and with ASEAN itself.
And I would hope that our ambassador to ASEAN is given all the tools he needs to do the job, and I don't think he has all the resources that he needs. So I would love to review the budget with you on that. Thank you. Can you also elaborate more? You touched on this, how the economic initiatives in the budget include both newer initiatives such as Outcompete China and the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, as well as ongoing efforts like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework will advance our policy goals in the Indo-Pacific regions. Drill down a little bit more. I know I'm getting into the weeds, but I'm very interested.
No, I think it's important. So we have a number of programs that we propose to fund in the budget to counter some of the challenges posed by China in the region. For example, on supply chain dominance, one of the things that we put together is something called the Mineral Securities Partnership, where we're pooling information and pooling resources with a number of other countries to be able to invest ourselves in critical minerals so that they're not dominated by any one country. We're working to build much greater supply chain resiliency, particularly among countries in that region. We have now about 17 economies that are part of this process to prevent near-term disruptions, to make sure that we develop early warning signals in case our supply chains are disrupted. And of course, for more fundamentally, helping these countries build out a significant amount of infrastructure. We're doing that through some of the funding we have in the budget for the Asia-Pacific. We also more broadly have something that the President established with the G7 called the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. And that really runs the gamut. We've been able to generate investments, starting with government resources, but primarily getting the private sector to invest. We were the catalyst for it, in everything from Brazil nickel and cobalt mining to the Indonesian energy transition, a $20 billion investment in helping them make a transition, upgrading telecom networks in the Pacific Island countries, mobilizing investment capital for internet service providers in the region, as well as in Africa and Latin America, setting up vaccine manufacturing in Senegal, and rail linkages among countries in Africa, all of which deals with some of the challenges that China has posed in being able to have the field to itself in many of these areas. No longer the case. But there's an intense focus in the budget on the Indo-Pacific, more specifically, including a fund to focus infrastructure investment in the region.
Thank you. Wow, 7 minutes goes quick, Mr. Chairman,
It
or
does
8 minutes.
It does when you're covering the world, or even a very specific part of the world.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking all of our nominees for your lifelong dedication to public service and for making yourself available today. I'm going to start with Ms. Biswal. I have long argued that in order to meet the strategic challenge of the People's Republic of China, we need to address the needs of our partners and allies around the world. As the development financing arm of the United States, the DFC plays a critical role in this effort. Nowhere is this more true than in Southeast Asia, and in particular mainland Southeast Asia, where the Belt and Road Initiative has financed billions of dollars for railroads, ports, and industrial projects. On my regular visits to the region, I repeatedly hear about a desire for more U.S. engagement and for alternatives to PRC financing for major infrastructure projects. How do you assess the initial success of the DFC in engaging in this area, and what are your priorities in ensuring that the United States is competitive with the PRC in the infrastructure space in Southeast Asia?
Senator Duckworth, thank you so much for that question. I agree wholeheartedly with you that this region is extraordinarily important and that a priority for DFC. I believe to date DFC has projects nearly $6 billion in financing in the Indo-Pacific region. If confirmed, I would look to see how we can further scale up our programs, our project financing, particularly with respect to Southeast Asia and the nations of mainland Southeast Asia. I do believe that there are many opportunities with a robust private sector to be able to address core priorities, including in energy security, in telecommunications, in building private enterprise, and I look forward to working with you, if confirmed, in understanding your priorities on these in this region as well.
Thank you. Well, following up on that, the Blue Dot Network. The Blue Dot Network is a joint project of the United States, Japan, and Australia that supports investment in high-quality infrastructure projects around the world. I think that's a great example for how our regional partners can increase our reach in the infrastructure area. It doesn't have to be all United States. I think our partners are important as well. Is there more that the DFC can do to leverage our ability to convene allies to advance our goals globally and in the Indo-Pacific specifically? And I'm looking to Japan and South Korea, for example.
Senator, I know that DFC has already created trilateral frameworks and agreements to work with Japan and Australia. They have a quad framework through which they are working with Australia, Japan, and India in the region. And I know that there's a desire to be able to do additional programming with, for example, Taiwan. And if confirmed, I would look to see how we can further enhance our partnership and collaboration, including with South Korea, with multilateral institutions as well, and leverage the investments of partners and allies to advance financing in the region.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to return to Malaysia a little bit. I know we've talked a little bit already, but Mr. Kagan, as you well know, excuse me, economic and trade issues and climate change are major concerns for many of our Indo-Pacific partners. According to the 2023 ASEAN survey carried out by Singapore's ICES Yusof Ishak Institute, Malaysian respondents cited the economy and climate change as their top two concerns. Moreover, 60% expressed concerns about the growing economic influence of the PRC. But at the same time, when those same respondents were asked whether the administration's premier economic initiative, the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, the IPEF, would be beneficial to Malaysia, 60% of the respondents answered either unsure or no. Mr. Kagan, how do you assess current U.S. efforts to engage Southeast Asia and Malaysia in particular in the economic realm? What economic initiatives would you prioritize if confirmed?
Thank you very much, Senator Duckworth. And I think it's an excellent question, and it's one that is a major challenge for the administration, but one that we have put considerable effort into trying to address. I mean, one element, and we see this here with Nisha, is DFC. DFC is a very, very important tool and one that I think we can use more in the region as we expand the capacities that it has. I think another one, obviously, is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the IPEF, which you referred to. I totally take the point that a significant percentage of folks in Malaysia were either unaware of it or didn't think it would be positive. I think part of that is because it is very new. And I think that the effort that we're trying to do with IPEF is to address challenges that traditional trade approaches haven't always addressed. The kinds of challenges that we saw come to the fore during the pandemic, where we realized that overdependence on supply chains that run through one area have their own problems completely separate from whatever political issues are involved. And so I think that IPEF is trying to address in 4 key areas things which we think really are important to the region. And, clearly it is not yet well known enough, and I think the jury is out in Malaysia in terms of the impact. On the other hand, Malaysia was one of the partners that did sign on to Pillar 2, the supply chain pillar, which was brought to conclusion in Detroit several weeks ago, and I think that is a sign that Malaysia recognizes their significant opportunities. So if confirmed, I would want to keep using the tools that we have, strengthened DFC, IPEF, engagement by other U.S. government agencies, EXIM, USAID, though they don't do things directly in Malaysia, but I think their efforts in the region are of value to the region and to ASEAN, of which Malaysia is a member. And I think we would want, if confirmed, to keep pushing forward in those areas so that the region better understands the value of economic engagement with the United States and understands that we are seeking an affirmative agenda on economic engagement that tries to address the region and their concerns in ways that are valuable for them.
I think your mentioning of ASEAN is really important because so many of the powerful players within ASEAN have signed on to IPEF. And I think that's a good way forward. Thank you.
Consent that I be permitted to speak for up to 7 minutes, and Senator Grassley be permitted to speak for 5 minutes prior to the scheduled vote.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I've come to the floor today with a simple question. When exactly was the moment that military women like me no longer had the right to bodily autonomy? Our nation was just fine with me using my body as I saw fit when I chose to use it to fight wars on its behalf. It was all right with me using it as I wish when I decided to risk every drop of blood in this body to fly a Black Hawk into combat. It was even okay with me losing parts of this body, leaving parts of it strewn across a battlefield in Iraq in defense of this great nation. In fact, people thanked me for my service, for making that incredibly personal choice about my own being, my own life. I know the same is true for many of the other female service members and veterans who have made this similar decision to serve our nation. So my question is, precisely when do the folks pushing anti-choice policies think that we American women no longer have the basic human right to make our own decisions about our own health? I ask because over the past year since the Supreme Court announced its Dobbs ruling, we have faced an onslaught of anti-woman, anti-choice bills that would effectively turn women into second-class citizens, rendering them incapable of adjudicating matters related to their own bodies, transforming them from people with autonomy into mere vessels subject to the political whims of lawmakers whose beliefs tend more towards insurrectionist than feminist. Lawmakers who think making America great again equates to sapping away women's rights again. This week is no exception, because this week, my colleagues across the aisle, led by my fellow veteran, Senator Ernst, are trying to hold our annual defense bill negotiations hostage in an attempt to force through an extremist amendment that would overturn existing DoD policy. An amendment that would keep troops and their families who are stationed at military bases in anti-choice states from getting the resources they need to travel elsewhere to get basic reproductive health care. You know, our service members often move every 2 or 3 years. They don't get to choose where they're stationed. They receive orders to be somewhere, then they pack up their rucksacks and go. And I've seen estimates that about 40% are assigned to bases in states that now have draconian reproductive rights laws. Now, if Senator Ernst's amendment to the NDAA becomes law, thousands of military women would be stripped of their right to bodily autonomy just because they've chosen to serve their country. Think about how shameful that is. Think about how disgraceful it is that so many of the same so-called leaders who applaud these women for choosing to put themselves in harm's way overseas are trying to wrest control over their bodies away from them when they're back on U.S. soil. And think about how astounding it is that the folks backing this kind of policy seem ignorant to the hypocrisy laden in the idea that the greatest democracy in the world, a nation born out of a fight against governmental overreach and that takes pride in self-determination, would actually strip away the right to personal freedom from the very citizens who've sworn an oath to protect others' rights, to keep others free. When I fought in Iraq, at the beginning of our rotation, it was so early on in the war that food logistics was not yet set up. We were still living in tents and had no personal hygiene facilities other than the wet wipes we'd get in care packages. So when it came time for me to deploy, Army doctors issued me birth control patches so I could control my menstrual cycle, since for the first 2 months that I was set to be downrange, there would be no female sanitary support. In other words, because I wouldn't be able to get tampons, pads, or the like for those early days, yet I still needed to fly my missions, it advantaged the military for me to control my reproductive cycle. I was happy to do it because it was for the good of the Army, the good of the mission, and thus the good of this nation that I love more than life itself. But looking back, especially after this week, my takeaway is that our country was just fine with me seeking reproductive care when it suited them, but only when it suited them. Because today, we live in an America whose representatives waver even on the basic question of whether women should have access to the kind of care they readily supplied me when it fit their needs. To me, this Republican amendment effectively punishes women for their willingness to put on the uniform. The policy is both morally corrupt and militarily short-sighted, as how could it not impact the future recruitment and retention of our armed forces if women understand that if they wear our nation's colors, that if they follow orders and are stationed at whatever base they're told to report to, their fundamental rights may remain forever out of reach. Yes, we're talking about abortions here, certainly, but this amendment my colleagues are so focused on passing also impacts a range of other basic life-saving and sometimes even life-creating reproductive care, including fertility treatments, both of those who've worn the uniform and for the partners of those who serve, or the urgent medical services needed in the tragic event they miscarry a child that they do want. So when I hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle champion this policy, what I hear them say is that they either don't understand or don't care about the very real, severe effects that service members and dependents could face if they can't access reproductive care. What I hear them say is that they want to force female service members to give birth whether they want to or not, whether they are ready to or not, regardless of the burden, the cost, the implications for their careers, and more importantly, their lives. What I hear them say is that they don't believe that the readiness of women service members affects our military's readiness, that they don't think recruiting women is important for the future of our military, that they don't care about the contribution that women make to our armed forces, that they don't value the service of women, point blank. And ultimately, sadly, that means they don't care about solving our military's recruiting challenges as much as they do about getting on the good side of the anti-choice billionaires who bankroll campaigns. That is offensive and hypocritical. These proposals are misogynistic and sadistic. These proposals are craven and cowardly. In other words, it's a perfect snapshot of today's self-interested, self-defeating GOP. Look, we Democrats on the Senate Armed Services Committee have used every negotiation tactic under the sun to try to stop our Republican colleagues from crashing down the entire defense bill negotiations with this one poison pill. But let me be clear, we cannot pass a defense funding bill if this amendment is hidden deep in its fine print. We've even offered to hold a separate vote on this same exact policy as a standalone bill, a solution that would both protect this week's larger NDAA process while also letting the rest of the Senate have a say on this single piece of legislation. But Republicans have decried this offer, calling it a ploy. It's not a ploy. We're giving them the vote that they say they want. They don't want a solution. They don't want fairness. They just want to scream and shout. They want to show off to the most fringe parts of their base, knowing that in a few days they'll somehow contort reality and blame Democrats, even when they're well aware that their own political agenda is at fault for Congress failing to pass this critical national defense legislation. So, just as I made my own decision about my body when I signed up to fly Black Hawks in Iraq, I'm making the choice today to use my voice to say enough. We must not allow Republicans to score political points by restricting the personal freedom of the very people who have dedicated their lives to defending that most fundamental, most American ideal. Our female service members, veterans, and military families deserve access to health care, regardless of what part of the country they happen to be stationed in. They deserve to have full control over their bodies here at home, just as they did when they were carrying rucksacks and M4s on those bodies overseas. To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, if you care about the strength of our military, if you care about defending our freedoms that have defined America since the first drop of ink was written on our Constitution, then you will vote against this amendment. Please do not abandon the women who have done so much to keep our union safe. Please do not repay our heroes for their sacrifices by telling them what they can and cannot do with the bodies they put at risk time and again to protect our country. And please, as you sit at our fancy desk under this hallowed historic dome, ask yourself if you're desperate for a pat on the back from Fox News, that you're so desperate for a pat on the back from Fox News that you'd be willing to vote to strip away the rights these women have spent their lives protecting. I certainly could not live with that decision, with that vote. I hope the same is true for each of my colleagues. I yield the floor.
Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, I join my colleagues today in expressing my great disappointment in my our colleague from Alabama and his continuing hold on military promotions. He has argued, and I've seen him say this several times, that he is not affecting military readiness and that this hold on the promotions of senior officers does not hurt our national security. And if it did hurt our military readiness, that he would certainly stop the hold. So I'm here to tell you about 6 different jobs and the individuals nominated to those particular positions, and for people to decide whether or not they think having these positions go unfilled with a confirmed officer is jeopardizing our military readiness. The first position is at the Army Space and Missile Defense Command. This is the Army's force modernization proponent and operational integrator for global space, missile defense, and high-altitude capabilities. It sits at the nexus of an integrated deterrence between the United States Space Command, U.S. Strategic Command, and U.S. Northern Command. A pretty important job, I would think. To fill the position, the President has nominated Major General Sean Gainey to be a Lieutenant General in the United States Army and the Commanding General of this U.S. Space and Missile Defense Command. Major General Gainey has served for 33 years and has moved some 15 times in those years of service. He's a graduate from the Georgia Southern University ROTC program, and in those 33 years of service, he has earned the Distinguished Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit with 1 Bronze Oak Leaf Cluster, and the Bronze Star. He currently serves as Director of the Counter Unmanned Aircraft Systems Office, Director of Fires, Office of Deputy Chief of Staff, Gs 357, United States Army, Washington, D.C. I think the U.S. Space and Missile Defense Command is a pretty important job and pretty relevant to our national security. A second position that is being left unfilled with a confirmed nominee is that of Deputy Chief of Staff, G4, United States Army, Head of Army Logistics. We have been talking at length about logistics in a contested environment, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. The Army G4 develops, implements, and oversees Army strategy, policy plans, and programming for logistics and sustainment to enable total Army readiness today and a force modernized for the future. To fill the position of the Deputy Chief of Staff, G4 Army Logistics, is Major General Heidi Hoyle. Major Hoyle graduated from the West Point Military Academy, embarked on a 29-year career spanning 20 different assignments, including her position as the Director of Operations within the Office of the Army G4, as well as numerous combat deployments. She has been awarded the Legion of Merit with 2 Bronze Oak Leaf Clusters, the Bronze Star Medal with 1 Bronze Oak Leaf Cluster, and the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. She's more than qualified to fill this position, and the position needs her in it. Another position that is going unfilled with a confirmed officer is to be filled by Brigadier General Lawrence Linton to be a Major General in the United States Army Reserve. Brigadier General Linton is currently serving as Deputy Commanding General Support, 88th Readiness Division at Fort Snelling, Minnesota. Brigadier General Linton graduated from the State University of New York, ROTC program, began a 31-year career of service that included 24 different duty assignments, notably deploying to Haiti, Bosnia, and Kuwait. General Linton served most recently as Chief of Staff of Operation Warp Speed, the critical effort to accelerate COVID-19 vaccination development. General Linton has been awarded the Legion of Merit, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, and the Meritorious Service Medal with Silver Oak Leaf Cluster and 1 Bronze Oak Leaf Cluster. I cannot think of someone more deserving of this promotion. The President has also nominated Brigadier General Stacy M. Babcock to be a Major General in the United States Army Reserve. Most recently, General Babcock served as Deputy Commanding General, United States Army Human Resources Command at Fort Knox, Kentucky, graduated from the Rochester Institute of Technology ROTC program in 1991, and has now served 32 years, a career spanning 25 different assignments, including a deployment to Bosnia and 3 separate deployments to Iraq. General Babcock has been awarded the Legion of Merit and the Bronze Star. The President has also nominated Colonel Peggy McManus to be a Brigadier General in the Army Reserves. Colonel McManus serves as the Deputy Director, Senior Policy Board Advisor, Office of the Deputy Chief of Staff, G1, Washington, D.C. Colonel McManus, commissioned in 1992 via ROTC, has now served 31 years, a career spanning 20 different assignments, including a combat tour to Iraq. Colonel McManus has been awarded the Meritorious Service Medal with 1 silver and 1 bronze oak leaf cluster. The President has also nominated Major General Andrew Jabera to be Lieutenant General in the United States Air Force and Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Deterrence, Nuclear Integration, Headquarters, United States Air Force. Do you think that not having a confirmed officer appointed to the Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Deterrence and Nuclear Integration is not hurting our military readiness? Of course it is. Major General Jabera would be responsible to the Secretary of the Air Force and Chief of Staff of the Air Force for nuclear deterrence operations. He would provide direction, guidance, integration, and advocacy regarding the nuclear deterrence mission of the United States Air Force and engage with joint and interagency partners for nuclear enterprise solutions. Only if Senator Tuberville would allow him to take up this position. And finally, I want to talk to you and read to you the background of Major General Robert M. Collins, who is nominated to be Lieutenant General of the United States Army and Military Deputy Director, Army Acquisition Corps, Office of the Assistant Secretary for Army of Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. If confirmed, General Collins will be the Senior Military Advisor on Army acquisition matters. This is at a time of critical modernization by the Army. And I know very well the Future Vertical Lift program. It is critical that we have a capable officer in this position. He is currently serving as Deputy for Acquisition and Systems Management. He graduated in 1992 from Shippensburg University ROTC program, has now served 31 years in uniform, spanning 24 different assignments. We need this officer in his job, in this position. These are just a handful of individuals I'm reading today. In which one of these positions does my colleague from Alabama think military readiness is not being affected, being left unfilled? All I can say is, Senator Tuberville, please reconsider. You are indeed putting our national security, our military readiness in jeopardy by continuing this hold. And with that, I yield.
Madam President.
The Senator.
I'd like to thank both Undersecretary Fernandez and Undersecretary Shambaugh for appearing here today. My first question, though, is for Undersecretary Shambaugh. You have spoken a lot recently about the importance of multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, and the necessity of modernizing them and fitting them to the challenges of today's world. And I do want to follow up. I know Senator Van Hollen asked about this as well. I'm going to be going to Manila here during the August break, Manila, Jakarta, Bangkok. I'm going to be meeting with Chantel Wong, and she's going to walk me through some projects in Manila itself. How would you assess the current relative strength of the Asian Development Bank in comparison with the PRC-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank? What are the weaknesses of the ADB compared to the AIIB, and what can we do to address these weaknesses? And are there any opportunities for us to perhaps adjust our participation so that we can be more effective?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think it's an extremely important one. The Asian Development Bank plays a really important role to exactly this issue we've been discussing today of making sure there are high standards lending options available to countries so that they do not turn to options that are not as high standards and not in their interest. I'd say in our efforts to evolve the multilateral development banks, much of that work started at the World Bank, but a big part of what we've been trying to do over the last few months and certainly over the next 6 months is to push that work out across all the multilateral development banks. We think there's a huge amount of opportunity at the Asian Development Bank in terms of using their balance sheet more effectively, which would expand the amount of lending they could do. In a way that maintains their status and their ability to make lends at good rates, but do quite a bit more. And so we think there's a huge opportunity to push out that work. We also think making it a more nimble bank to change the way the operational incentives function such that they can work better with countries on the needs they have. They can work towards global challenges better. We think there's a lot that can be done. You mentioned Ambassador Wong. We think she's terrific and doing a lot of work there, and I think there's great opportunity, and I'm glad to hear that you're going because I think it'll be a terrific visit.
Are there things that are pushing folks towards the AIIB as opposed to the ADB, or are there restrictions on ADB that they, you know, why would a nation choose one or the other? And maybe they're not in direct competition with each other. And especially when you think to places like the Pacific Islands, Palau, Marshall Islands, those kind of places where there are very few resources, are there things that sort of advantage AIIB or maybe push them in desperation towards AIIB?
I think the key is the last word you used there is in desperation, honestly. So I think it's in my experience with almost any finance minister I've spoken to, and I've spoken to a lot in the last 12 months, they would much rather work with us or work with the international financial institutions of which we are a member. They are better run, they are cleaner, they are transparent, and they are high standards. And that's what they'd like to do. And so that's why when we talk about opening up more headroom and more lending room at the ADB, it's so important because the more funding it has available at very good rates for countries, the more likely they are to work with the ADB, which is a better option for them, and it's more in our interest as well. So I don't think it's something specifically. I'll actually check with Ambassador Wong and our team if we think there's anything that is a block for some countries on ADB versus AIIB. But in my experience, it has probably been a question of opportunity. And countries need funding. Many of these countries are locked out of private financial markets, and so they're looking for funding where it is, and making sure that we have high standards lending available is crucial.
Thank you. My second question is for Undersecretary Fernandez. I know you're working on mineral security partnership, which I think will be an incredibly powerful tool for a more sustainable and resilient critical mineral supply chain. As of now, participation in the mineral security partnership in the Asia-Pacific region is limited to Japan and South Korea. How does the State Department continue to deepen engagement on critical minerals in the Asia-Pacific region beyond those countries, and what are the criteria for expansion of the MSP in the Asia-Pacific? I've had multiple conversations with Indonesian leaders who, feel like their minerals are being exploited by PRC-led firms, and they want somebody else in there, whether it's Australians or other partnerships, and they feel very much limited that there's only one country really leading the effort.
Thank you for the question. The MSP has been a priority of mine now since we started it in June of last year. India just joined, and now we have 14 countries, as well as the European Union. We reach out constantly to producing countries as well. We have spoken to a number of countries in the region. are trying to also do more with Indonesia, which has a number of critical minerals that will be important going forward. So that's what we do. Is we've had meetings at the United Nations with a number of these countries. I've traveled to Africa several times. I intend to go to Indonesia in the next 6 months, and part of what I will do there is talk about the Mineral Security Partnership. But we are in constant contact with the producing countries, because that's where the struggle will be won or lost.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, may I ask one additional question, or am I out of time?
Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow up on that. In instances where critical minerals projects might face a choice, again, similar to my earlier question, when there's a choice between pursuing support through the MSP versus pursuing support through Chinese investments or PRC investments, what are the tools that we have at our disposal to persuade them that it's worth following our higher transparency, environmental, and labor standards? And how do we win that competition?
One of our tools is the combined strength of the allies and partners. We started doing it because we found that individually we were missing out on opportunities. So with the 14 countries, we on a weekly basis we discuss specific projects. We discuss specific ways for our financing entities to cooperate. Also to get our private sector involved. But that's also part of the reason why we have proposed a $6 billion 5-year that we think will be transformational, a budget request. And one of the things that we intend to do with that is find critical minerals. We're doing it also as part of the ITSE fund, which is where the State Department received a 5-year $100 million per year. That is transformational. We can do something in the long term. And so we are working now, but we could do more. I can just cite one example. South Korea has announced that they will devote $1.7 billion to critical minerals through the Mineral Security Partnership. That's the kind of commitment that we're looking for from our partners, and that's why we put together our budget request.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bradley, and thank all of you for your testimonies. We'll start a period of questions now. First, I have a few questions that speak to the importance that this committee places on responsiveness by all officials in the executive branch. I would ask each of you to provide just a verbal yes or no to this series of questions. First, do you agree to appear before this committee and make officials from your office available to the committee and designated staff when invited?
Yes.
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 Do you commit to keeping this committee fully and currently informed about the activities under your purview?
Yes.
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 Do you commit to engaging in meaningful consultation while policies are being developed, not just providing notifications after the fact?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. And finally, do you commit to promptly responding to requests for briefings and information requested by the committee and its designated staff?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Now on to other questions. Chairman Menendez will be returning, but I will begin with the first line of questions. Mr. O'Brien, you come to this position during the biggest security crisis that Europe has faced in a generation, and at a transformative moment in U.S.-Europe relations. While European unity has shown tremendous resilience in the face of Russian aggression, it remains to be seen how it will weather what increasingly appears to be a years-long fight for Ukrainian sovereignty. Mr. O'Brien, in the wake of both the aborted mutiny of the Wagner Group and an ongoing Ukrainian counteroffensive, how do you assess, on the one hand, the ability of Russia to sustain the war effort and maintain the gains it made last year, and on the other, the ability of our NATO allies to maintain the level of support they have been able to provide thus far?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I look forward to working on these issues with all the members who are interested. I think the willingness of our coalition to stay together depends in large part on their sense of the solidity and sustainability of American leadership in the effort. And that needs to come from both sides of the aisle. I feel at this moment I would much rather be in our coalition supporting Ukraine than on the Russian side largely alone. On Russia, I won't speculate about what is happening within. Secretary Blinken has spoken about the difficulty of understanding the internal dynamics, but clearly there has been some fracturing. But from the posture of my current job, managing the sanctions side, we do see Russia facing some constraints. It is building its indigenous capacity to create certain weapons, but it is less and less able to source key components from many economies abroad. That puts a limit on its ability to wage a modern war. Instead, you see them waging static warfare, attacking civilian targets, including economic targets over the last week or so, not able to work with modern communications, rapid movement, precision, munitions, et cetera. We also see real constraints on the Russian economy. It's a deep economy. It was one of the largest 10 in the world at the start of this war. So they will be able to sustain themselves for quite a while. We don't see a collapse, but they are going to be forced to make difficult choices. They began the war with probably $850 billion US in sort of ready cash. Now it's probably about 250. We think there will be some choices facing it over the next several years. In the longer term, we think that its economy will shrink considerably. We expect by the end of the decade, Russia will be 20% smaller than it would have been if it had not waged this war. That makes it a less attractive partner, less able to sustain this conflict at the rate that they think that they can. On the other side, our coalition's been remarkably stable, and I think what we're seeing right now is that Russia is committing outrages in order to try to hasten some progress in this war, and instead it is isolating itself. Its attack on the global food system by taking more than 30 million tons of Ukrainian grain out of the global food supply, that strips the global south of about 24 million tons. That's food for tens of millions of people. And Russia can't replace that. So now it's facing a lot more isolation. So I'd rather be where we are. The work that we do to keep people unified is important. And I'll just close with one last note. Senator Hagerty talked about the importance of burden sharing, and I completely agree. We're now in a position where U.S. contributions are largely matched by what is coming from the rest of the coalition. That includes specialized contributions. We are 13th in terms of GDP on the amount of security assistance we are providing. So I think we're in a place now where everyone knows they have to put their shoulder to the wheel in support of this effort, because we are all going to benefit when Ukraine wins.
Thank you. Senator Hagerty?
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Senator Duckworth, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Brown, welcome to you and your family, and congratulations on your nomination. I really enjoyed our discussion last month. I look forward to continuing to work with you on our military's readiness if you are confirmed. Each of the military services faces challenges in meeting recruiting goals, in part due to historically small pool of eligible recruits, and that pool continues to shrink. That's why I'm introducing the Enlist Act to begin to remedy this issue. My legislation enables the Department of Defense to expand its recruiting pool to include longtime residents of this country. This could include many people who love this country and are dedicated to service, like DACA recipients or people who originally came on a work or educational visa and have applied to stay permanently, but can't receive an immigrant visa due to caps in the system. The Enlist Act will aid recruitment efforts by allowing highly skilled and motivated individuals to succeed in the military while still maintaining the department's security requirements and high enlistment standards. General Brown, during our discussion, you described traveling to bases and meeting new Americans eager to serve in the Air National Guard. I'd like to know if you think that the Enlist Act and its expansion of the pool of possible recruits benefits the military recruitment efforts, and I'd also like to hear your perspective on the value that highly qualified immigrants bring to the military.
Senator, as we talked about in your office, it's I do think about those who, as you mentioned, love this country, want to serve, want to raise their right hand and take an oath of office or oath of enlistment, and the aspect of the opportunity for them to become citizens of the United States. It provides an opportunity because in many cases they're very talented, and they want to stay in this nation. There's opportunities that the Enlist Act would help us in some of our recruiting, and again, talent that resides in this nation that wants to serve. And if they want to serve and meet the qualifications, I think they all should be provided the opportunity.
Thank you. I can't think of a better way to show love of this country. You want to be an American? Put on her colors, stand with shoulder to shoulder, and help defend her. I'd like to thank my colleagues on this committee and the staff for their work on this year's NDAA, which supports a strong and ready total force. I'm particularly proud of my NDAA provision expanding TRICARE coverage of assisted reproductive technology, or ART, for current service members and their dependents. Studies show that service members have higher rates of infertility compared to the general population, which is only complicated by an overly restrictive DoD policy and service members' deployment schedules. General Brown, expanding assisted reproductive technology services to female and male members of the uniformed services and their dependents, without regard to coital conception, helps members to start their families that they've always dreamed of. Do you think expanding our service members' access to this important health care is a positive recruiting and retention tool?
Senator, what I believe about we as senior leaders in the military have a responsibility to provide health care for all our members. And when I think about providing health care, I don't try to determine aspects of what type of health care, but health care at large. And we've done that in the past. We need to continue to do and support our military members and their families with the health care to ensure they're healthy. And we'll, again, continue to serve and be a part of the greatest fighting force in the world.
Thank you, General. And earlier this year, I led an Indo-Pacific CODEL that reinforced to me just how important our alliances and partnerships are in the region. I'm going back there again in August, Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand. I think that these partnerships are incredibly important, and I've asked these same questions of every service chief who's come before this committee, because I think we can be doing so much more to better these key relationships. General Brown, you have deep experience in interacting with allies and partners in the Middle East, in Europe, and in the Indo-Pacific. Can you speak about your personal relationships with air chiefs from other nations and how that may benefit your role as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff if you are confirmed?
Well, Senator, when I think about it, it's all about relationships. And it's the relationships I've been able to build with these various air chiefs. And in some cases, the air chief is retired and a new air chief comes in. So I have, relationships in the retired community as well. But it's also providing me opportunities to meet with the various chiefs of defense as I've gone and traveled around the world, and to include the Indo-Pacific. And if confirmed as chairman, I'll have an opportunity to deepen those relationships with the other chiefs of defense. And that's again, the value of these relationships I have as an air chief will open the door. And if I don't know that chief of defense, having a relationship with that air chief actually helps to open the door and continue to build a new relationship with the chief of defense who I don't already know if confirmed.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, just one very quick 10 seconds. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, because I came in late. I apologize for that. But I only heard half of my colleagues questioning to you. And he seemed to say at the end that he thought that you were advocating for quotas-based racial quotas in recruiting. And I didn't think that was the case. Is it more that my understanding is that you want to broaden the recruiting and allow anybody who wants to serve or qualifies to serve, and making sure that people have access to service? Or are you actually implementing racial quotas and saying only a certain number of Asians, certain number of black, certain numbers of whites can be recruited?
The pool, and we do not have quotas. That's against policy for us to have quotas.
Thank you for clarifying that, General.
Senator Scott, please. Thank you, Senator Duckworth.
Sure. First, General Brown, thank you for your service. I want to thank your wife for her service. And
when you took Ambassador Rudd there, which submarine did you see?
I brought back a hat from the USS New Jersey and delivered it to my committee chair.
Bravo. All right, Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Last month, I led a CODEL to the Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand to examine the many significant opportunities that our nations have to collaborate together in the Indo-Pacific region. So this is sort of following up a little bit on what Senator Kaine is talking about. Again, the White House touts AUKUS as a new security partnership that will promote a free and open Indo-Pacific that is secure and stable. And I agree, the positive impact of AUKUS extends beyond these three allied countries. And in fact, I received quite a few positive comments in the three nations I visited, Indonesia, Thailand, and Philippines, to AUKUS and what we are doing. For each of the witnesses, how does AUKUS and Pillar 2 in particular impact the Indo-Pacific region as a whole beyond the three nations, Australia, the United States? And how will our partner nations in Southeast Asia benefit from a stronger trilateral relationship and an enhanced Indo-Pacific presence from the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom?
Thank you, Madam Senator. First of all, I want to express appreciation for your investment in Southeast Asia. It really does matter that you've taken a strong interest in ASEAN countries, ASEAN centrality. What I'd like to say about those countries and more countries in Asia where you have been is we've invested a lot of time in diplomacy, in making sure that all countries in Asia understand in a transparent way what we are trying to achieve there. We stated earlier that AUKUS is a modernization of longstanding partnerships that will recognize the changes in the security environment for the future. And when we talk to Southeast Asian countries, you mentioned 3 yourself, but there are more than that. When we talk to countries like Singapore's of the world, Malaysia's, they also recognize these challenges, and they believe that our transparency, our candor about the challenges we see ahead, that AUKUS will help address that. We are not trying to challenge ASEAN centrality. We, in fact, believe that AUKUS can be complementary to ASEAN centrality. So we look forward to more discussions in the future with our allies and partners in Asia and around the world to make sure they understand the truth about AUKUS, to make sure that the disinformation coming from other parties does not prevail, and that they have facts, and that when we provide those facts, we believe that we will prevail over them in ensuring the security of the East Asia Pacific region in the future.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis?
Thank you. I'm actually going to agree with Pete Asmoy. I think when we talk about AUKUS, it's not just about the alliance between and the strengthening of that alliance between Australia and the UK. It's really the question, we say it a lot, but we really mean it when we talk about a stable, secure, free, and open Indo-Pacific. When that's what this alliance is about. And fundamentally, I think as Pete Asmoy was talking about, we believe that benefits the countries you listed as well as others. And I think resilience is another word, a term that we have been talking about, meaning that we are investing in a way that countries will be able to feel more secure and more resilient, facing, and I think that Dr. Carlin mentioned this earlier, a whole new set of challenges and threats that we need to be able to respond to collectively as well as individually.
Thank you. Dr. Carlin?
Thank you very much, Senator Duckworth, and I really appreciate hearing reflections on your trip. That's heartening. You know, the vision that we have of a secure and stable Indo-Pacific, I think, is a vision that is manifested by AUKUS, but also by so many of our allies and partners around Asia as well. And to the extent you have more partners who are actively involved in ensuring that that security and that stability can be realized through collaboration and cooperation, I think it really becomes a better situation for all. So this feels like a pretty positive and I think symbiotic effort.
I agree with you. I think that the success of these regional mechanisms, whether it's AUKUS or the Quad, can only help our interests in the Indo-Pacific region in particular. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Budd. Senator Duckworth, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to our witnesses. I want to take this opportunity to reinforce the importance of our support for Ukraine. I attended a very important briefing on Ukraine with members of this committee yesterday, and I believe that the United States it's vital that the United States continue to support the Ukrainian people against unprovoked Russian aggression, and I urge my colleagues to consider how important assistance to Ukraine is to our national security. Putin and the rest of the world are watching our actions, and any failure of this Congress to continue appropriating funds to support Ukraine's defenses will have consequences throughout the world, including right here at home.
And if we fail to support Ukraine, Putin will learn the lesson that he can do whatever he wants. Others will learn that same lesson as well. That makes the world a less safe place, a less free place, and that impacts our economy and our national security. Our allies are providing immense support to Ukraine right now, but they are watching what we do closely. If we retreat early, we are jeopardizing the war effort and playing into Putin's hands. Ms. Abercrombie, if confirmed, your position would be responsible for working with other interagency partners to deliver vital defense capabilities to Ukraine. And Mr. Chalet, you would become the lead architect of DoD policy if confirmed. Can both of you speak to the importance of our assistance to Ukraine's war effort, as well as to United States national security?
Senator Duckworth, thank you for that important question. I think, as President Biden has said, we will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And then from the Defense Department perspective, that certainly includes contracting and getting the equipment to Ukraine. So if confirmed, I would work very closely with interagency partners and across the department, importantly, to make sure, as Congress has appropriated the dollars, we are getting things on contract as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
And Senator Duckworth, thank you for the question. Thanks for the time in your office a few weeks ago. Fully agree with my colleague here and fully agree with the thrust of your statement on the importance of Ukraine winning. It's a very simple proposition from my perspective. If Russia were to stop fighting, the war would end. If Ukraine were to stop fighting, Ukraine would end. And I think it is in our national security interest to continue to provide significant support to Ukraine.
Thank you. Earlier this year, I introduced a Southeast Asia Partnership Expansion Act and secured its inclusion into the Senate version of FY24 NDAA. My bill expands a military cybersecurity partnership with Southeast Asian partners that I created in 2020. Based on the success of that program in Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam for cybersecurity training and partnership with the United States, I'm now seeking to include the Philippines and Malaysia into the program. Additionally, I recently led a CODEL to Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines to strengthen ties and reinforce support between Southeast Asia and the United States. During my trip, I spoke with U.S. service members advising partner militaries in the region and heard that there is a huge demand for additional training that could increase interoperability, like English language training. In fact, they mentioned the fact that they've had some of their candidates return from the U.S. military academy because they failed the English language test 3 times. And this was a very capable officer and yet could not pass the English language test. Mr. Chalet, how important are programs like English language training and basic cybersecurity training for interoperability? And what other ideas do you have to build our interoperability in the region?
Well, thank you, Senator Duckworth, and thanks for your championing the importance of Southeast Asia. As we've discussed many times, it's been a priority for the Biden administration. It's been a priority for me personally. In the last 2.5 years at the State Department, I've done around 8 trips to Southeast Asia because I believe those partners are critically important to our national security and our posture in the Indo-Pacific. I think we've made some very, very important strides in deepening those relationships, but I think there is much further to go, and I would, if confirmed, would look forward to work with you closely on some of the innovative ideas you and others have had on a way we can deepen those partnerships.
Thank you. So if confirmed, will you work with me to help secure funding, authorities, and resources for some of these ideas in future years?
Absolutely, Senator. I'd like to work with you on that. Thank you.
Yes, because I want to ensure that we are prioritizing and adequately resourcing programs that can build on these ties in Southeast Asia. If confirmed, Mr. Chalet, how do you plan on using your diplomatic experience gained during your time at the State Department to shape the DoD's policy on building relationships with partners in the Indo-Pacific region, specifically Southeast Asia?
Well, thank you, Senator Duckworth, for the question. As I said earlier, I believe that what I call defense diplomacy is a critical part of the job of Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and if confirmed, I would seek to pursue that and work with my colleagues as well who are doing that. These relationships and partnerships are critically important to our security. They're a force multiplier for us. They are part of our enduring advantage, and they're at the heart of our national defense strategy. So whatever we can do to make those alliances and partnerships stronger is something that I'm going to set out to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Time has expired. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Secretary Liu. Who walked away from the JCPOA? Which administration?
It was the last administration.
That's what I thought. Thank you for your willingness to serve once again. I just need to pause here and take a moment to say that my heart is hurting. Ever since October 7th, I've been thinking endlessly of the children, the innocent children, Israeli, Palestinian, and even Illinoisan, whose lives have been upended or tragically ended during these devastating days. Every night I go home and I hug my 2 little girls close, haunted by the suffering of the innocents. They are too young, my girls, to understand why I'm so upset and why I'm holding them so tightly. But there are countless families who won't get the chance to hug their children close any longer, and my heart breaks for all of them. Of those Americans presumed to be held hostage by Hamas, many have ties to my home state of Illinois, whether themselves being Illinoisans or by a family member or friend who has reached out to my office asking for help. Their families and friends are advocating tirelessly for their release, for their access to basic medical care, and for information about their loved ones. At the same time, Jewish and Muslim communities around the world are feeling deep emotional wounds from the violence. We are sadly already seeing hate crimes spring up in the wake of the war, like this past weekend's horrific fatal stabbing of an innocent 6-year-old Palestinian American, Wadea Al-Fayoumi, in Plainfield, Illinois. This shocking and tragic murder is a painful reminder that we must confront and reject any Islamophobic rhetoric that seeks to conflate the evils of Hamas with the Palestinian people or with a vast majority of Muslim people. Just as we must confront and reject the anti-Semitic rhetoric that seeks to draw a false equivalence between the democratically elected government of Israel and the terrorist organization of Hamas. As ambassador, you would play a critical role in helping to strike the right tone for these very difficult and complex conversations, while demonstrating the United States' long-term resolve and right commitment to support our Israeli allies. I believe that you will serve and represent our interests well as a voice for democratic values that rejects hate and discrimination on the basis of race, religion, or ethnicity, and ground us in our shared rights to live in peace and build a better future together, but also in Israel's right to defend herself. Secretary Liu, I want to invite you to reflect on that work and the role you hope to play if confirmed to be our ambassador.
You know, Senator, I find acts and beliefs of bias and hatred against people because of who they are or what they are just totally unacceptable. And when it's manifested in acts of violence, whether it's against a Jew or a Muslim, it's equally horrible. What I've said about the attacks in Israel is that almost 1,500 people were killed because they were Jewish. If it had been 1,500 Muslims who were killed because they were Muslims, that would be a problem too. We have to try and humanize these issues and understand that it's Hamas that's the enemy. It's not Palestinians who are the enemy. Now, Hamas hides behind Palestinians. It creates terrible, terrible choices in terms of how you defend yourself. But at the core, there has to be mutual respect and hopefully more than respect if we can get to a better place.
Do you agree that Israel has the right to defend herself?
Absolutely.
Do you agree that the core tenet of one of the core tenets of Hamas is to destroy Israel?
Absolutely.
Do you agree that the innocents in Gaza deserve to have access to secure humanitarian corridors so that there's access?
And I'm pleased that even this morning progress has been made on that front.
Thank you. If confirmed, can you commit to working to address both the urgent and underlying humanitarian needs in Gaza, including establishing secure humanitarian corridors, access for key medical workers like the Red Cross, and access to food, water, and sanitation for the people in Gaza?
I think we must continue to do that, and if confirmed, that will be part of my mission, and it will have to be done in a way that respects the security of Israel, and the two do not have to be inconsistent.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
I am haunted by the face of the Israeli children who Hamas terrorists abducted, just as I am by the conversations I've had with parents desperate to get their children home from the captivity of a terrorist organization. I'm haunted by the stories of the Palestinian children who have been buried in rubble, just as I am by the images of 6-year-old Wadea Al-Fayoumi, who was brutally murdered by his landlord over the weekend in my home state of Illinois because he just happened to be a Muslim. A 6-year-old who loved playing with his Legos, a 6-year-old who could have been any one of ours. I know many others in this chamber across this country and around the world are haunted too. So we must act with urgency to secure the sustained flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. We must restore essential services like water as quickly as we can. And we must must ensure hostages being held in Gaza receive urgent medical treatment and are safely brought home as soon as humanly possible. Innocent life needs to be protected consistent with the laws of armed conflict. These actions mark both moral imperatives by helping innocent civilians, but also are steps towards ensuring Israel's security. I am grateful that the administration has been working around the clock on these priorities, and I will continue to do everything in my power to support them. Because during a crisis that is almost always defined by lose-lose outcomes, this could be the rare step that would actually benefit all innocent parties. It would help to get those trapped innocent Palestinian families who are mourning their own lost loved ones and who have been living with no access to basic necessities. It would get assistance to the hostages from Israel, the US, and other nations who we are all praying for so desperately. It would send the message that the global community is unified in ending the suffering of innocent human souls. As someone who was shot down by an insurgent in the Middle East, I know all too well that these are the kinds of moments when the next generation of insurgents get radicalized, as groups like Hamas thrive when people are suffering the most. They take advantage of the despair and the hopelessness that they themselves manufacture, that they themselves manipulate, and they use it to recruit more to their cause. We cannot let Hamas succeed. We cannot let the blast of missiles drown out the voices of our better angels. Because our hearts are big enough and our perspectives wide enough to know that Hamas's reign of terror terrorizes the little girls and boys of not just Israel, but Gaza too, as they use them as human shield. And in this moment, it's hard not to feel the darkness weighing down upon us. But for all of those in harm's way, we must channel our devastation into motivation. We must use our voices to lift up the humanity of innocent civilians, not to dehumanize those who may look or pray differently than us. We must work as hard as we can to bring about a tomorrow for both Israelis and Palestinians alike, where their skies won't be marred with missiles and their streets won't be scarred with blood. And that is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to roll out of this chamber, head back to my office, and keep fighting to get our hostages home. I will fight to get our greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel, the aid and support they need. And I'm also going to work to get basic humanitarian aid into Gaza. Then tonight, when I go home, I'm going to hold my daughters in my arms until they wriggle free. And every moment that that hug lasts, I'm going to be more aware than ever how lucky I am to still be able to squeeze them tight. I will start. Mr. Inman, as I noted in my opening statement, there's a culture of complacency around school bus safety that is deeply frustrating. And I want to commend the NTSB for being a strong voice swimming against a tide of that complacency, promoted by industry interests and every NHTSA leader, except for the former administrator, Mark Rosekind. NTSB has spoken clearly and convincingly that NHTSA should require large school buses be equipped with 3-point safety belts, automatic emergency braking, event data recorders, electronic stability control, and fire-resistant materials on fire suppression systems. Can you believe that none of those are in our school buses our kids ride every day? Mr. Inman, do you concur with NTSB school bus safety recommendations? And if so, can you elaborate on why enacting My School Bus Safety Act of 2023, which the National Sheriff's Association endorsed and which requires NHTSA to implement NTSB's recommendations, would help reduce or eliminate preventable fatalities in large school bus crashes?
Well, the short answer is yes. NTSB recommendations are very clear on this. They've been outstanding for a long time. And I can say personally, school bus crashes, one death is too many, one injury is way too many. But being from the state of Kentucky, where the two greatest school bus fatalities have occurred in Carrollton County and Prestonburg, is a tragedy that we're not able to protect our children any further. I know you've been an advocate on this, and most of your bill is actually written around NTSB regulations specifically. One exception, I think, on the 8-hour or 30-hour position. If I were to be confirmed, I hope I could be an even more vocal advocate on that, especially for those children that don't have a choice sometimes on that transportation method.
Thank you, especially for kids in our rural communities who spend hours on school buses trying to get home from school. Given today's hearing is examining a nominee to serve on MWA's board of directors, I would be derelict in failing to express the disability community's deep frustration that our aviation system still fails to make sure that every passenger with a disability is treated with dignity and respect. In a report published 2 years ago, the Government Accountability Office reported that, and I quote, essential travel information is not always available in a format accessible to all, and infrastructure barriers, including complex terminal layouts and long distances between gates, can be difficult for some to navigate. Mr. Slater, if confirmed, how would you make sure improving airport accessibility and the experience of travelers with disabilities is a top priority at DCA and IAD?
First, I would say thank you for the work that you're doing in the space. I think it's extremely important. With respect to the work that I do professionally outside of potentially being confirmed for the board at MWA, this is something that we work on, we focus on with every project in real estate for retail tenants, for residential tenants. It's something that we've always gone above and beyond and view the current laws and requirements as sort of a baseline minimum and something to exceed. And specifically, with respect to travel and through the airports, it's extremely important that folks are able to have a pleasant travel experience and with dignity as well. So it's something that's extremely important to me professionally outside of my potential confirmation to the MWA board.
Thank you. You should know that there's still gates at DCA that are not accessible. In fact, I've had to be taken down freight elevators down into the back in order to access, I think it's gate 10A or B, but there are still gates there that are not accessible. As noted in my opening statement, we're experiencing an alarming spike in dangerous runway incursions and near misses at airports across the country. We have been lucky that these have not resulted in fatalities, but they are a clear warning sign that the overall system is stressed. As NTSB Chair Hamady has said, the absence of a fatality or an accident doesn't mean the presence of safety. We are going to have a hearing on Thursday to examine this in greater detail, and I am looking forward to hearing more from Chair Hamady then. Mr. Inman, I just wanted to ask you, do you agree that the number of near misses we've been experiencing is alarming? And if confirmed, will you work to provide recommendations to improve our system's safety margins?
Absolutely. Any incident is alarming. We have a multi-layered system. It's the Swiss cheese approach. So there's obviously something coming through the different layers that are causing these incidents. There's a lot of opportunities to use automation. Surface detection systems are only right now installed on 43 out of 500 airports that have commercial flights. I know the chairman has taken a lot of advocacy on this and has actually impaneled some other hearings previously, or not hearings, but forums and roundtables. So it's important that we're looking at these incidents and trying to get ahead before we truly have a tragedy.
Thank you. I think that there is definitely a need to invest in workforce development, especially with air traffic controllers, pilot safety. In many of the near misses that we've had so far this year, it has been the pilot in the cockpit, based on their experience, who have actually averted the collision that could have happened. But certainly, workforce development is something that is critically needed in our aviation system.
Would you like me to comment, ma'am?
Sure. Please do.
Well, I think we're seeing it in not only the number of retirements that have occurred, but the staffing that the FAA has been attempting to try to achieve. I mean, we're looking at potentially growth, I believe. Fully trained controllers have fallen 10%, while airport traffic has increased 5%. And in May of this year, 3 out of 313 air traffic facilities met their target for staffing. I mean, there needs to be a greater emphasis on that. And as an NTSB board member, I hope I can help advocate and lend my voice to that as well.
Thank you. Is Senator Vance? Oh, Senator Klobuchar is next. I apologize.
Thank you. We will do a second round of questions for anybody who's able to stay. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Chair Shaheen and Ranking Member Ernst, for holding this hearing today. Dr. Haney, I would like to direct my questions to you. Given your role in overseeing the Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University and its work administering the Boots to Business program, as you may know, for the past 2 Congresses, I've introduced bipartisan legislation with Ranking Member Ernst called the Veteran Entrepreneurship Training Act, which would codify the Boots to Business program into law. I have long supported this program because of its successful track record helping service members, veterans, and military spouses to build critical small business development skills and prepare them for professional success after military service. Dr. Haney, from your experience administering the Boots to Business program, how has the program contributed to the entrepreneurial journey of the more than 194,000 veterans, service members, and spouses have gone through the program since 2013? And can you share any positive outcomes you've witnessed in your work?
I can.
It's no better bigger softball than that. And that's like slow pitch, fat, coming across the plate.
Senator, I will say there are a few people on the planet that are bigger evangelists for your legislation than me. And it's a good way to start answering your question, because when I started doing this work all the way back in 2006, 2007, there was no pathway out of the military for business ownership. Matter of fact, service members transitioning from military to civilian life were discouraged on a regular basis for pursuing entrepreneurship. And so much has changed since then. And I think Boots to Business, what it does is it makes for an informed consumer. Is how I like to describe it. I think that's the power in Boots to Business, and not just an informed consumer for those that eventually go on to pursue business ownership, but an informed consumer of those who, through Boots to Business, learn that business ownership maybe isn't a good fit for them, for their families. Those are metrics we don't collect, and I wish we did, because I think that there's real power in the program in helping individuals also see that this isn't a good fit for me, my family situation, and because business ownership is not like going out and getting a traditional job. If it doesn't work out, you leave that job and find another one. You're putting, as you heard these stories, you're putting personal capital at risk, and you do want to be an informed consumer of making that choice. That said, when you look at what's come from Boots to Business, it's beyond powerful. About 6 years ago, my institute partnered with Inc. Business Media and the Inc. 5000 to create something called the Vet 100. This is an annual listing of the 100 fastest growing veteran-owned businesses in America. The 2023 Vet 100 just came out, and of those 100, there are 25 veterans this year that went through this ecosystem, that their businesses were birthed through this Boots to Business to partners, whether it's Vets in Procurement or our programs at the IVMF, and they're now running 4, 5, 6 years later the fastest growing privately held veteran-owned businesses in America. I think that's the power of the program and the model, and making informed consumers of those leaving military service.
Thank you. Do you believe cementing the program into statute would bring increased stability to program administrators and future participants? And what more can SBA and Congress do to expand opportunities for veterans, service members, and their spouses who are interested in small business entrepreneurship?
So I absolutely do. I couldn't even wait for you to finish asking me the question to say that I think the stability that you describe is critical. I think it also, a question that Colonel Green was asked earlier about getting the word out. I think one of the challenges, and it's not fair for me to say this, DOD isn't in the room, but it really is for DOD and the sergeants and captains to make sure that folks transitioning are aware of that is the first point of contact and first point of awareness, and regularizing, if you will, Boots to Business will signal to DOD that this is not something that year in and year out could go away, and it's a commitment of the country to the program, and I think that will make all the difference.
Thank you. Thank you,